Chapter 139. Although Madame Li wasn't a good person, Han Yunxi still admired her poison skills. Her poisons couldn't be treated by just anyone. She didn't know what was wrong with Grand Concubine Yi and Murong Wanru's brains. They clearly knew Madame Li's poison skills, but didn't pay respects to a great Buddha like her to seek out a poison doctor. It's not even daybreak yet. What does Miss Wanru need me for? Han Yunxi asked despite knowing the answer. Begging for someone's help had to be proper. What did it mean to send a servant girl to find her without saying a word? This servant girl, Cui Ping, was Murong Wanru's trusted aide. Of course she knew what was going on, but Miss Wanru only told her to find someone without saying anything else. It wasn't good for her to act on her own. To reply, esteemed Wang Fei, this servant isn't clear. Only, Miss Wanru is in a hurry. It must be something important that can't be delayed. The sedan chair is waiting outside, so let's hurry. Cui Ping was very smart. Han Yunxi only smiled. What kind of important matter could she have? Go back and tell her that I have a pile of urgent matters to take care of and can't leave. I'll go over later. Hearing this, Cui Ping grew anxious. Esteemed Wang Fei, Miss must have something urgent. Let's go back to the estate first. Of course Miss Wanru didn't have anything important, but Grand Concubine Yi did. Last night, esteemed Imperial Concubine had coughed non-stop as soon as she returned home. She'd found no less than 10 poison doctors, but none of them could find any poison. She'd found a few Imperial physicians as well, but all of them insisted that the coughing was caused by poison. It made her so anxious that she wanted to kill someone. Grand Concubine was the one who feared illness the most. Even a small cold was enough to make her temper explode, to say nothing of such a serious matter. All of the poison doctors and Imperial physicians were cursed until they knelt on the ground. Even Miss Wanru wasn't spared. As a matter of fact, Miss Wanru couldn't take it anymore and could only swallow her pride to find esteemed Wang Fei. Fine, fine, fine. You go back first. I'll take care of the matters on hand and catch up afterwards. Is that all right? Han Yunxi asked politely. Cui Ping was, after all, a maidservant. When she heard this tone, she did not dare to say no. She could only hurriedly return. Han Yunxi glanced at the skies. It would be daybreak in another hour. Madame Li had said last night that she wouldn't let Grand Concubine Yi see tomorrow's sun. With the poison in her throat, Grand Concubine Yi should be coughing up blood by now. If Grand Concubine Yi really died, then she could be promoted to the rightful mistress of the Duke of Qin's estate. Even if it was just a title, it was still better than her current life. But she still couldn't harden her heart. Moreover, Grand Concubine Yi might be loathsome, but she wasn't as venomous as Murong Wanru. She only added insult to injury, but Murong Wanru had plotted against her on her own. Besides, she was a doctor. If she didn't save him, she would be no different from a murderer. She lazily stretched her body, got up, and said a few words to Chen Xiang before leisurely going out the door. Currently, the Duke of Qin's peony garden was a mess. Grand Concubine Yi was coughing up blood, a large mouthful of black blood. Imperial physician, quickly summon the Imperial physician. Hurry. Murong Wanru was so scared that her face had turned white as she shouted in a panic. If Grand Concubine Yi was gone, wouldn't she be chased out the door? The Imperial physician and poison doctor both entered, frightened by the sight as well. The poison doctor quickly took a sample of the poisoned blood for examination, while everyone waited anxiously. Even the bad-tempered Grand Concubine Yi was enduring the itch in her throat. She didn't dare to make a sound as she watched. But the poison doctor could only confirm that she'd been poisoned, but couldn't determine the type of poison. Grand Concubine Yi was furious. Since she couldn't grab anything, she grabbed the hairpin on her head and threw it at them. Trash. A bunch of trash. All of you get out for me. Scram. Grand Concubine Yi coughed even more violently in her agitation. Soon enough, she coughed up another mouthful of black blood, her face turning green with fright. Did Han Yunxi come? Did she come? Of course she knew that Han Yunxi was much more formidable than these poison doctors, but she was someone who cared more about face than death. How could she stoop to beg Han Yunxi? But even if she didn't say anything, Murong Wanru should do it in her place. This was a matter of life and death. I did. She's at the Han estate, but she didn't come. Just then, I sent someone to find her. How could sister-in-law be like this? Murong Wanru replied hastily. Murong Wanru really wasn't willing to beg or give Han Yunshi a chance to perform meritorious deeds. She was waiting for Grand Concubine Yi to get angry and order for Han Yunshi to be summoned back by force. But Grand Concubine Yi only glared at her and scolded, "Isn't it all because of you? Last night, I was perfectly fine when I let her come back with me. How could I suffer this? You go personally, right now? Be more polite when you speak." Grand Concubine Yi had seen Han Yunshi's personality before. She was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. When that girl got stubborn, she might not treat her even if she forced her back. It was almost daybreak. She didn't dare to joke around with her own life. She really regretted that the Duke of Qin had been there last night as well. They'd gone with the flow to get Han Yunshi to treat the poison. Wouldn't everything have been fine then? Murong Wanru was stunned. After all these years, this was the first time Mu Fei had criticized her like this. Mu Fei, I don't know either. Enough? Why aren't you going yet? Are you trying to kill me? Grand Concubine Yi shoved her harshly, scaring Murong Wanru into silence and out the door. Just as Murong Wanru was about to leave, Han Yunshi returned from the back door. She ran straight for the peony courtyard and rushed to Grand Concubine Yi's rooms without announcing her arrival. Mu Fei, Mu Fei. Hearing the voice, Grand Concubine Yi bolted upright on the bed, only to see Han Yunshi run inside in a hurry. Mu Fei, what time is it now? Why hasn't your poison been treated yet? Why didn't you say a word? Wanru is really something. She sent 2 people to find me in a row, acting so mysterious. No matter how I asked, they didn't say anything happened to you. Fortunately, Zhao Mama told me. Aya, how did she do things? What's there to worry about when it's a matter of life and death? She's taking your life as a joke. Han Yunshi complained as she pretended to take Grand Concubine Yi's pulse. Secretly, she'd already activated the detox system to do a deep scan. No matter how strong Madame Li's poison was, it couldn't escape Han Yunshi's advanced technology. Very soon, Han Yunshi had an idea of what was going on. Hearing Han Yunshi's complaint, Grand Concubine Yi's fists clenched. She was already angry that Murong Wanru hadn't gone to find her personally. Who knew that she'd sent someone without telling the truth? Han Yunshi wasn't wrong. This was taking her life as a joke. This girl didn't know what was important. It looked like she'd spoiled her rotten. Seeing Grand Concubine Yi's breathing grow heavier, Han Yunshi's eyes flashed with craftiness. Suddenly, she withdrew her hand and cried out, "Oh no!" Grand Concubine Yi was so frightened that she almost fell off the bed. What's going on? Is there no hope? Mu Fei, you've poisoned her heart and lungs. There's no time. Han Yunshi said anxiously. Grand Concubine Yi only felt her vision darken as she grew dizzy. She grabbed Han Yunshi's hand and cried, "Yunshi, you have to save me. You have to save me. Mu Fei doesn't want to die." Yunshi? If Han Yunshi remembered correctly, this was the first time Grand Concubine Yi had called her so affectionately. When a person was about to die, all airs, face, and grudges were nothing more than fleeting clouds. Mu Fei, we've delayed for too long. If it was a bit earlier, even if it was just a bit, I'd have 100% chance. But now, I can't guarantee anything. Han Yunshi was in a difficult position. Then what do we do? What do we do? Grand Concubine Yi was so flustered that she didn't know what to do. Mu Fei, I'll try to use acupuncture needles to suppress the poison. Have the poison doctor find the medicine right away. I'll definitely do my best. As for whether or not we'll make it in time. Han Yunshi didn't finish, but Grand Concubine Yi didn't dare to listen. She hastened to say, "Hurry, hurry." There was no other way. She didn't want to die. Then Mu Fei, hurry and lie down. I'll do the needles right away. Han Yunshi pretended to be anxious. As soon as Grand Concubine Yi lay down, she took out her needles and carefully searched for acupuncture points on her neck. She even recited the prescription for the poison doctor. She was racing against time and doing her best. No one would suspect that she was faking it. Actually, as long as she used the needles, she could suppress the poison's flare-up and buy at least 3 days of time. But how could she not use this chance to play with Murong Wanru properly? If she wanted to get rid of Moron Wanru under the same roof, she had to win over Grand Concubine Yi's heart. After confirming the prescription, the poison doctor split up to get the medicine and boil it as fast as possible. It was a long time before Han Yunqi finished with the needles. She exhaled and sat down on one side. By now, the eastern skies had already turned the color of a fish's belly. It was almost daybreak. Grand Concubine Yi lay on the bed, her entire body stiff. She didn't dare to move. Mu Fei, does your throat still itch? Han Yunqi asked with concern. No, it doesn't itch as much. Yunqi, say, do you think we'll make it in time? Grand Concubine Yi was very nervous. Han Yunqi deliberately sighed. If I'd known earlier, then, speaking up to here, she quickly changed the topic to comfort her. Mu Fei, the heavens help the worthy. You'll definitely be fine, definitely. Any words of comfort were pale and powerless in the face of life. Grand Concubine Yi's eyes turned red as her mind turned blank. She only hoped that the poison doctor would hurry up and deliver the medicine. She didn't speak, but grabbed Han Yunqi's hand and held it tightly, as if hoping that Han Yunqi could give her some strength. Han Yunqi hesitated before reaching out with her other hand. Mu Fei, don't worry. Tell me as soon as your throat itches. Grand Concubine Yi nodded. Her nerves stretched taut as she focused on her throat. The waiting time was so long. Suddenly, a flurry of footsteps came from outside. It's here. Grand Concubine Yi rejoiced. As expected, a poison doctor personally carried in a steaming bowl of medicine. Esteemed Imperial Concubine. This was brewed according to esteemed Wang Fei's prescription. The medicine was here, but her throat hadn't even itched yet. There was still time. She was saved. Saved? Grand Concubine Yi was so moved that she sat up on her own. Han Yunqi took the medicine and fed her mouthful by mouthful without stopping until she finished the last mouthful. She exhaled in agitation. Yunqi, will you be fine after drinking the medicine? Even the emperor feared death, to say nothing of an old lady like Grand Concubine Yi. Han Yunqi was used to such fears and nodded. Congratulations, Mu Fei. Now there's no need to worry about your life. But it'll take a while for the medicine to take effect. I'll help you take out the needles later. Grand Concubine Yi nodded again and again, her heart finally returning to normal. She leaned back against the pillow and silently exhaled. Han Yunqi quietly took her hand and took her pulse. Grand Concubine Yi calmed down and saw Han Yunqi's serious expression. She couldn't help but re-evaluate this girl. Wanru, no matter what happens in the future, just say it. Otherwise, you and I won't be able to bear the consequences, Han Yunqi said indifferently as she walked past Moron Wanru and left. Moron Wanru woke up with a start after the door slammed shut, only to see Grand Concubine Yi staring at her with narrowed eyes. Imperial Mother, you? This concubine's life was almost ruined by your hands. You still dare to squabble with your sister-in-law over such a serious matter? Who gave you the guts? Grand Concubine Yi demanded angrily. Moron Wanru had calculated everything perfectly. If she went to invite her personally, then even if Han Yunqi didn't come, she could have Mu Fei forcefully summon her back. There was still time. How would she know that Han Yunqi would come of her own accord? Mu Fei, I thought she knew. How could she not know what was going on if I went to invite her at that time? Moron Wanru could only defend herself like this. Grand Concubine Yi understood the gravity of the situation here. She grew even angrier. Enough. Stop trying to explain yourself. You're clearly risking my life. Don't think I can't tell. How could Grand Concubine Yi not know Moron Wanru's true feelings towards Han Yunqi? Grand Concubine Yi could allow her to play tricks on Han Yunqi, but she'd never allow her to play tricks on her. Moron Wanru understood Grand Concubine Yi's temper very well. She knew she had no room to defend herself, but she was too surprised. She never thought that Han Yunqi could catch her off guard in front of her most doting Mu Fei. Han Yunqi, Moron Wanru, won't rest until I get rid of you. She knelt down, delicate and pitiful, and choked with sobs. Daughter was wrong. Daughter was gravely wrong. Mu Fei, please punish me severely. Grand Concubine Yi's anger wouldn't dissipate so easily. She pointed at the door. Get out immediately. Shut yourself up and reflect on your mistakes. Without my orders, you're not allowed to leave. Han Yunshi heard this from the door and almost burst into laughter. Fortunately, she held back in time. Satisfied and in a good mood, she left for real. As soon as she reached the hibiscus courtyard, Han Yunshi knew that Long Fei hadn't returned at all. That guy really was heartless. Mu Fei's life was on the line from being poisoned, but he didn't even show his face. She ate breakfast as she asked, "Is Chu Shifeng not here either? He went out yesterday afternoon and hasn't come back." Esteemed Wang Fei, the entire estate knows about what happened yesterday. You're so formidable. Zhao Mama smiled as she gave her a thumbs up. Last night's events would cause a sensation for days. It wasn't the first time Han Yunshi had made headlines in the capital, so she didn't care much. But Zhao Mama's words reminded her of Madame Li's words before she died. Everyone knew that Tianning had a Duke of Qin, but not Emperor Tianhui. Everyone knew that Qin Wangfei's poison skills were brilliant, but not that she was an expert in detoxification and poisoning. How much trouble would these words bring to Long Fei Yi? How much trouble would that bring to her? Would Long Fei Yi be able to settle the matter of a traitor in the Han family that implicated the entire family? She didn't know if that fellow was in the palace or at the solitary enclosure right now. She could only wait until he came back to find out the situation. Thinking up to here, Han Yunshi lost her appetite. She was exhausted from a sleepless night, so she told Zhao Mama not to disturb her before going upstairs to rest. After being kidnapped, faced with Madame Su's false accusations, and then the matter of the bed, Han Yunshi hadn't had a good night's sleep yet. Although her mind was full of worries, she was still exhausted. She didn't even reach the bed before she fell on it and pretended to be dead. After lying there for a long time, she lazily turned over. Who knew that when she looked up, she would see a pair of enchanting eyes staring at her with a smile on the roof beam. Han Yunshi shrieked as she bolted upright, scared out of her drowsiness. This fellow. Wasn't this fellow the devilish owner of the celestial fragrance tea shop, Gu? How did you get in here? She cried out in alarm. The Duke of Qin's estate was heavily guarded, and this hibiscus courtyard was even more airtight. This fellow had actually snuck in without a sound. Seeing Han Yunshi's reaction, Gu's smile became even more brilliant. He hooked his legs onto the rafters and hung down like a bat. He chuckled at Han Yunshi. "I thought you weren't afraid of anything, but it turns out you're such a coward." Han Yunshi rolled her eyes and asked warily, "What are you doing here?" "Poison lass, is this how you treat your savior?" Gu asked seriously. Han Yunshi imitated his serious appearance and asked back, "Where is my savior?" Gu Qishao arrogantly pointed at his chest with his thumb. "Here." Han Yunshi put on a fake smile. "I don't know you." "You." Gu immediately flipped over and sat beside Han Yunshi. "Hey, no matter what, I risked my life to save you. Are you really going to turn your back on me?" Han Yunshi immediately stood up and put a safe distance between them. She looked at him with disdain. "If you have something to say it quickly. No matter where this evildoer came from, with his dissolute nature and unruly appearance, he must be a bad guy with no bottom line and no integrity. It was best to stay away from him. TSK, 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 heartless lass." Gu looked dejected. "Enough of that. If you had acted earlier, would you have risked your life to save me?" Although Han Yunshi had pleaded for leniency on behalf of the Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop, that was just to spite Long Fei. Gu Qishao had saved her for the same reason as Long Fei. They'd both delayed until the very end and ignored her danger to lure out the true culprit behind the scenes. Gu Qishao's martial arts skills were definitely on par with Qingyi's. He could very well have saved her back in the caves. After being exposed by Han Yunshi, Gu stroked a strand of hair behind his ear and slowly smoothed it down. He did not quibble. Han Yunshi raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Her heart was filled with emotions. Why did this guy's smooth movements look even prettier than a woman's? And it did not look awkward at all. Could it be that everything would be beautiful if one was beautiful? Of course, Han Yunshi would not be bewitched by his beauty. She did not hold back. "Why are you looking for me?" Long Fei was already unhappy when she took off her shoes and socks. If he knew that a man had barged into her room, who knew how that conservative iceberg would react? "I have something to do," Gu immediately replied. Then tell me. Actually, Han Yunqi was still very curious. If he took the risk to barge in here to find her, there must be something. Gu chuckled and got up to approach. Han Yunqi immediately retreated. Stay away from me, or else I'll call for help. This guy was really brilliant when given a little sunshine. Give him an inch, and he would want a mile. Only then did Gu Qishao stop and ask in a low voice, Lass, who taught you your poison skills? Who told you to use goldfish to test for 10,000 snake poison? Last night, Gu was also at the Supreme Court's entrance and saw the entire process of Han Yunqi testing the poison. Not to mention the Li family, even he did not know that goldfish could test for 10,000 snake poison. Presumably, the masked man behind the Li family did not know either. This lass was really amazing. Who was her master? Where did she learn her poison skills? If Han Yunqi remembered correctly, this guy had asked her the same question back in the cave. He couldn't have chased her all the way here just to ask this question, right? I thought you were here to plead for leniency for the Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop. Han Yunqi was surprised. This gentleman can afford to lose a trifling tea shop. Gu smiled confidently. This gentleman is more interested in you and your poison skills. What an evildoer. Han Yunqi actually felt rather sorry for the tea shop. She wanted to find a chance to ask Chu Shifeng how he dealt with Long Feiyi, but it looked like there was no need for that now. As for her poison skills, a third came from innate talent, a third came from hard work, and the last third came from the help of the detox system. If someone had to ask her who her master was, she could only say that it was the detox system. This formless system contained all sorts of knowledge about poisons from ancient times to modern times. Even now, she was learning as she used it. Of course, this was a secret, her biggest secret. She would never tell anyone. And who taught you your poison skills? You're the owner of a tea shop, but your poison skills aren't bad either. No wonder Long Feiyi investigated you. Han Yunqi cleverly changed the topic to Gu. Chapter 141. Upon hearing Han Yunqi's question, Gu licked his lips wickedly but did not answer immediately. Instead, he patiently sat back on the warm couch and even leaned lazily on it. With one hand supporting his head, he looked at Han Yunqi with interest. What did this fellow mean? Han Yunqi leaned against the cupboard at the side with her arms crossed and frowned as she looked at him, who knew that Gu would suddenly blink his bewitching eyes at her. His long eyelashes fluttered, and although he looked innocent and harmless, he was actually charming to the bone. This was really a tempting evildoer. Han Yunqi was stunned for a moment and couldn't take her eyes off him. She was almost bewitched by him. Luckily, her willpower was not bad and she resolutely looked away. She casually picked up a teacup and threw it at Gu. Unfortunately, it was caught by him. What exactly do you want? This rascal. Han Yunqi was about to lose to him. She was so sleepy and really wanted to sleep. Answer my question. You've been a good-for-nothing since young, and the Han family didn't have any poison skills to learn. Your mother, Madame Tianxin, was highly skilled in medicine, but not in poison. When you got on the sedan chair, there were poison scars on your face. When you got off the sedan chair, the scars were already cured. When did you start learning poison skills secretly? You've never left the capital and rarely left the Han family. Who taught you? Upon hearing Gu's words, Han Yunqi narrowed her eyes and gave a cold smile. You've done a thorough investigation. Gu wasn't the least bit modest. Of course, I also know that you. Who knew that before he could finish his sentence, Han Yunqi suddenly shouted loudly, Ah, someone come, there's an assassin. Since she couldn't get an answer from him, she didn't want to waste her precious sleep time with this fellow. Gu didn't expect this and suddenly jumped up. You. Han Yunqi worked even harder. Someone come, quickly, the assassin is here. Soon, the sound of footsteps could be heard from all directions. Gu had put in a lot of effort to get here. He narrowed his eyes and licked his lips. He gave Han Yunqi a thumbs up and exuded a dangerous aura. Aren't you afraid that I'll take you as a hostage? But who knew that Han Yunqi was not afraid at all? She lazily lay down on the warm bed, looking like she was telling him to do as he pleased. She even closed her eyes. She was not afraid of him. If this guy was really dangerous, she would have been in danger long ago. Gu was stunned for a moment and then burst out laughing. This woman was really interesting. He liked it. Even though the footsteps outside were approaching, Gu had no intention of escaping. His figure flashed and silently approached Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi only felt a gust of wind blowing against her face and instinctively opened her eyes. Who knew? Just as Han Yunqi opened her eyes, Gu leaned down and gently kissed her forehead. It was just a touch. It was ticklish and soft. It was lighter than the breath that fell on her face. At this moment, she saw his perfect chin and his Adam's apple. Everything was so close to her. It turned out that this man who was more beautiful than a woman also had such a masculine side. Han Yunqi's eyes widened and every part of her body froze. All that was left was a panicked and frightened heart that couldn't stop thumping wildly. Heavens, this evildoer kissed her. No, he was molesting her. It was just a light peck. Gu retreated and smiled enchantingly. What are you looking at? It's just a mark. This young master has taken a fancy to you. As soon as his voice fell, he didn't wait for Han Yunqi's reply. His figure blurred, and he disappeared into thin air. Almost at the same time, 3 guards rushed in and Zhao Mama also rushed over. Seeing esteemed Wang Fei lying on the bed and the room empty, Zhao Mama anxiously said, "Esteemed Wang Fei, where's the assassin? Where's the assassin?" Han Yunqi finally recovered her senses and quickly sat up. Assassin? Assassin? Where's the assassin? Zhao Mama was anxious. She was afraid that esteemed Wang Fei would be frightened. I just dreamed of assassins. There were so many assassins. It was so scary. Han Yunqi lied. With Gu's ability, he probably wouldn't be able to catch up to them. For a moment, the incomparably nervous Zhao Mama and the guards all let down their guard. They didn't know what to say to their master. How could she shout so loudly in her dreams? However, they didn't have any suspicions. After all, the hibiscus courtyard was heavily guarded. Normally, assassins wouldn't be able to enter. Zhao Mama had the guards withdraw and quickly poured a cup of hot tea. Esteemed Wang Fei, quickly drink some tea to calm your nerves. Han Yunqi indeed needed to calm her nerves. She had really been frightened. Gu, that bastard. Rogue. He actually dared to take liberties with her when she wasn't paying attention. She drank the water while vigorously wiping her forehead. She was at a loss as she pecked her forehead. Was this considered a kiss? Was this considered her first kiss gone? Esteemed Wang Fei, your forehead. What happened? Zhao Mama suspiciously asked. Han Yunqi immediately let go. No. Nothing. Gu Qixiao, that evil bastard. She decided to put him on her blacklist. He better not come here again. Otherwise, every time she saw him, she would shout. No, every time she saw him, she would poison him. Her body was originally weak, but after being frightened by Gu, Han Yunqi was completely awake. She sat for a long time before sneaking into Long Fei Ye's palace to soak in the hot spring. In the end, her physical strength was limited. After soaking in the hot spring, she laid on the bed while pondering over Gu's background. She unknowingly fell asleep. This sleep could be described as dark. She slept through the afternoon and night, only waking up at noon the next day. When Han Yunqi woke up, she heard all kinds of rumors in the capital. Without exception, they were all related to what happened last night. There weren't many rumors about Madame Li and her daughter, but there were many jokes about Mu Luiyue. Everyone was waiting to see if she would keep her bet. The general's manor sent out news that Mu Luiyue had fallen ill as soon as she returned. She had a high fever and was unconscious. It was such a coincidence that she fell ill at such a critical juncture. As soon as the news came out, the discussions in the capital grew even more intense. Gambling houses big and small even started betting on whether Mu Luiyue would keep her promise, whether Han Yunqi would let Mu Luiyue go, or whether the Duke of Qin would interfere. In any case, there were all kinds of bets. There weren't many discussions about Madame Li and her daughter, nor about Madame Li's last words. It wasn't clear whether someone was leading the discussion, or the matter of the bet was so popular that it covered up everything. Han Yunqi couldn't set her mind at ease until she got a definite answer from Long Fei Yi about the safety of the Han estate. The next night, Han Yunqi had just left Grand Concubine Yi's quarters when she saw that the lights in Long Fei Yi's quarters were still lit. Excited, she immediately went to knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Long Fei Yi was lying in a rocking chair, his handsome brows covered in fatigue. One couldn't help but wonder what he'd been up to these past few days. Long Fei knitted his brows and stood up to walk to the desk before opening his mouth. "Come in." Han Yunqi pushed open the door and walked all the way to the study. Long Fei picked up a brush to write a memorial without even looking at her. Han Yunqi stood in front of him and asked from the other side of the desk, "Madame Li is Qingyi, right?" Long Fei replied mildly. Since Madame Li was Qingyi, she was the leader of these spies. If they caught Madame Li, they'd be able to catch all of them in one fell swoop. What about that green-faced, fanged masked man from that day? Han Yunqi asked again. That masked man was a true master of poisons. If they didn't get rid of him now, there'd be more trouble in the future. Other than Madame Li, no one knows of his existence. Long Fei's tone was still very calm, but Han Yunqi's mind was filled with Madame Li's silent face. She couldn't understand. What kind of ability did that masked man have to make Madame Li so loyal to him? After asking about Madame Li, Han Yunqi hesitated for a moment before asking again. Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop's owner, did you find out his background? At this moment, Long Fei raised his head and asked coldly, "Do you need something from this prince?" Han Yunqi didn't know if it was because they were too close or because his eyes were too cold, but she subconsciously took a step back. Couldn't she look for him for nothing? Wasn't she asking about something? Gu flirted with her. All right, this wasn't what she wanted to ask. She'd better get straight to the point. Is the Han family really going to be implicated in the case of the spy? The public version of this matter was that Madame Li and her daughter poisoned the young general. But in reality, Madame Li was the leader of the spies in Northern Li country. Her crimes were extremely heinous and harmful, directly threatening Tianning's safety. Since Madame Li came from the Han family had to be responsible. I can't give you a clear answer right now, Long Fei said mildly. Hearing this, Han Yunqi grew agitated. Then what about Ear? You promised me you'd protect him. This was the first time Long Fei had seen Han Yunqi care so much about someone. Was Han Yuni her weakness? He hated it when this woman had a weakness. The matter of the spy was all within his control. He had great power and was confident that he could protect Han Yuni, but Madame Li's words that night had angered Emperor Tianhui. Han Yunqi had no idea that not only was the Han family full of suspicions, but she herself had gotten herself into trouble. Those who knew how to treat poisons were the best at poisoning people. How could Emperor Tianhui not have any thoughts about Madame Li's words? Should he promote her in an important position or guard against her elimination? For someone as suspicious as Emperor Tianhui, it was a matter of a single thought. Moreover, Han Yunqi was Long Fei's wife. How could he not have a headache? He'd have to deal with Emperor Tianhui on this matter. Your lordship can't give you a clear answer right now, Long Fei said mildly. What? Han Yunqi was shocked. She leaned forward and shouted, You clearly promised me. He'd promised her before, so she'd taken him to Madame Li's rooms to look for evidence. Why was he saying he wasn't sure now? What did he mean? He couldn't protect Ear? This was the first time someone had dared to speak so loudly to him. Long Fei said sternly, Aren't the Han family and Han Yuni perfectly fine? Why are you in such a rush? Han Yunqi immediately backed away, unwilling to give up. Then what do you mean by that? It's the literal meaning. If there's nothing else, you can leave. Long Fei was vexed. Seeing this woman so agitated made him even more annoyed. He really didn't know why he wanted to protect her. In any case, she was the woman Emperor Tianhui had given him. If Emperor Tianhui wanted her, he could take her back. What was he worrying about? Han Yunqi didn't expect this at all. How could this guy be like this? She grew angry as well and slapped the table. You promised me, so you have to do it. Long Fei's gaze rested on her hand before slowly moving up to meet her eyes. Very good. This woman had broken another record. Not only did she speak loudly to him, she even slapped the table. Your lordship will say it one last time. You, get out. Long Fei's voice was icy. Han Yunqi wasn't afraid at all. She glared at him before flicking her sleeves and leaving. Chapter 142. Han Yunqi angrily left the palace and returned to leisurely Cloud Pavilion. She almost bumped into Zhao Mama, who was walking towards her. Esteemed Wang Fei, what happened to you? Zhao Mama asked with concern. Of course, she knew that esteemed Wang Fei had just returned from His Highness's place. Han Yunqi had a belly full of anger and wanted to go upstairs without saying anything. Zhao Mama hurriedly stopped her. Esteemed Wang Fei, there's a letter for you. At this time, Han Yunqi stopped in her tracks. Letter? Who would write to her? In this world, she didn't seem to have any friends who wrote to her. Esteemed Wang Fei, which friend wrote to you? Zhao Mama asked curiously. This letter was delivered by a child, and there was only 5 words on the envelope. To Qin Wang Fei. There was no other information. Zhao Mama was a very curious old lady, but in the end, she didn't have the guts to open it privately. Seeing Zhao Mama's curiosity, Han Yunqi casually snatched the envelope and went upstairs without saying a word. Who wrote to her? Han Yunqi was very curious. Who knew that when she opened it, she would find that it was from Gu Beiwei. He wanted to meet her at Mingxiang Tea House tomorrow afternoon. That fellow should have left the palace. With that fellow's personality, if it wasn't for business, he would definitely use this method to ask her out. Only, did he want to meet her for a private matter? All right, she would know when she went tomorrow. At this time, Han Yunqi didn't have the heart to think too much. She walked to the window and looked at the brightly lit palace. Her heart felt stifled again. That hateful Long Fei Yi. Why was he so fierce? She waited for him for 3 days and was met with a fierce response. He had clearly promised her, so couldn't she ask a few more questions to clarify things? Now that the Han family was indeed doing well, he had better ensure that the Han family would continue to do well. Otherwise, sooner or later, she would return the fierce response. That night, Han Yunqi was destined to lose sleep. The next day, she woke up at dawn and sat in the courtyard to make tea. Not long after, she saw Long Fei Yi about to leave. Cough, cough. She deliberately coughed a few times. Long Fei Yi really stopped and turned around to look at her. Your Highness, would you like to have a cup of tea? She asked calmly, as if nothing had happened last night. However, Long Fei Yi refused without thinking. No need. After saying that, he put on his cloak and hurried out, as if he had something urgent to attend to. Han Yunqi still maintained a leisurely expression. However, as soon as Long Fei Yi's back disappeared, her eyes slowly narrowed. This guy. She had already taken the initiative to give in. What else did this fellow want? Couldn't he just sit down and have a good talk with her? If the Han family's matter was really difficult to deal with, she could understand and think of a solution together, right? She already knew about the spy, so what else was there to hide from her? If he left in a hurry, would it still be because of the spy case? Han Yunqi had always been a strong-willed person. Perhaps Long Fei Yi was the only one who could anger her. While she was huffing and puffing, she saw Chu Shifeng pass by. Han Yunqi immediately called out, Chu Shifeng, come here. Chu Shifeng immediately appeared in front of her. Esteemed Wang Fei, what orders do you have? Has His Highness been at the solitary enclosure or the palace these days? How's the progress on the spy case? Han Yunqi asked seriously. Chu Shifeng found himself in a difficult position. Although he was His Highness Duke of Qin's personal guard, he didn't know everything about the man. Moreover, even if he did, he couldn't speak carelessly. Keeping one's mouth shut was the most important profession for a servant. To reply, esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate isn't clear. Chu Shifeng replied seriously. Still at the solitary enclosure? Did Han Ruoxue do the same? I don't think she knows anything about the poisoning, Han Yunqi asked next. Esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate really doesn't know. How about you ask His Highness when he comes back? This subordinate still has. Chu Shifeng wanted to slip away, but Han Yunqi said lazily, could His Highness have gone to see the Emperor? I was planning to go to the palace as well, so I might as well go take a look. Chu Shifeng stopped at her words, his expression flustered. Esteemed Wang Fei, His Highness won't enter the palace today. It's better if you don't go. So he's at the solitary enclosure then? Han Yunqi pressed on. Chu Shifeng averted his gaze and hastily made up an excuse. Esteemed Wang Fei, today's the end of the bet. Aren't you going to pay attention to the situation at the general's estate? Did she need Chu Shifeng to remind her? Of course Han Yunqi knew what day it was. You still haven't answered my question, Han Yunqi pressed on. Esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate really doesn't know a thing. Chu Shifeng couldn't take it anymore and disappeared before he finished. Han Yunqi knew that Chu Shifeng's mouth was tight, but she wasn't asking for any shameful secrets. Was there a need to be so secretive? Han Yunqi felt that something was off, but she couldn't figure it out. After breakfast, she rested a bit before leaving the house. As she passed by the general's estate, she saw a crowd of people crowding around the gates. There were 3 rings of people inside and outside, all of them talking and making a racket. The gates to the general's estate were shut tight. Even the side door was shut. Han Yunqi sucked in a cold breath. Although she knew that Mu Luiyue would be the center of attention today, it shouldn't be like this. However, on second thought, with Mu Luiyue's spoiled and arrogant temperament, she should have offended quite a few people. There were plenty of people who'd hit her while she was down. There must have been someone who'd take advantage of this opportunity to fan the flames and hit her while she was down. This matter had caused such a huge commotion that people had gathered at the entrance. Would Mu Luiyue come out? Was the great general really going to shield Mu Luiyue like this? Han Yunqi was filled with anticipation. She paused briefly before turning to leave. She didn't notice that a sedan chair was parked on the other side of the crowd. Princess Changping, who hadn't shown her face for a long time, was sitting inside. As soon as Princess Changping received Mu Luiyue's letter, she'd rushed to the capital. Unfortunately, the journey was too long and she'd only gotten back this morning. Originally, she planned to deal with Han Yunqi with Mu Luiyue, but who knew that Mu Luiyue had actually lost? At this moment, she lifted a corner of the curtain and looked at the commotion in front of her, her expression uncertain. She and Mu Luiyue had played together since childhood and could be said to be best friends among best friends. How could she allow Mu Luiyue to be bullied like this? Moreover, the one bullying Mu Luiyue wasn't just anyone, it was Han Yunqi, the person she hated the most. Princess, Miss Luiyue is too pitiful. Madame Li is a member of the Han family, so perhaps Han Yunqi already knew. That's why she purposely made a bet with Miss Luiyue. Servant Shuanghong guessed in a low voice. She'd received many benefits from Mu Luiyue, and naturally had to speak up for her. Haha, Luiyue, that idiot, was set up. I don't know how the justice courts investigated this case, but in this princess's opinion, the Han family, including Han Yunqi, are all suspects. Princess Changping said angrily. Shuanghong was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Princess, today is the last day of the bet. If Qin Wangfei is suspicious, then can't we postpone the bet? Shuanghong's words woke her up. Princess Changping hurriedly had the carriage driver turn around and rush back to the palace. She wanted to beg her mother. If it didn't work, then she'd go directly to her imperial father to plead. Perhaps there was still hope for this matter. Princess Changping returned to the palace as quickly as possible and headed straight for the Empress. Imperial Mother, you must help Luiyue. Moreover, if Han Yunqi really is suspicious, we can't let her off so easily. This is a good opportunity. Imperial Mother, this is our chance for revenge. Did you hear me? Princess Changping was simply a spoiled child. She tugged on the Empress's sleeve without any decorum. Enough. She's your big brother's savior, the Empress said unhappily. Of course Princess Changping knew this, but she didn't take it to heart. As she saw it, Han Yunqi being able to save her big brother crown prince was Han Yunqi's honor. After all, her big brother was going to be Tianix's emperor in the future. Mother, don't tell me you really think of her as your savior. If Han Yunqi could be used by the Empress Dowager, then the Empress would naturally treat her as her savior. But last time, the Empress Dowager had thrown out an olive branch, but Han Yunqi hadn't taken it seriously. Now the Empress Dowager was still holding a wait-and-see attitude towards that girl, so it wasn't good for her to make a move. Changping was someone who couldn't keep a secret. Naturally, the Empress wouldn't tell her that the Empress Dowager wanted to rope in Han Yunqi. Changping, the imperial harem doesn't involve itself in politics. Madame Li's case isn't something you and I can criticize, so don't get involved. Also, Mu Luiyue, that girl, is a busybody. Don't mix with her. The Empress warned seriously. How could Princess Changping listen? She stamped her foot and ran off. She was going to find Imperial Father. Unexpectedly, Princess Chongbing was stopped by eunuch Shui as soon as she reached the imperial study. Princess, His Majesty is currently receiving a guest. If there's anything, come back another day. It'll be too late if I come another day. Out of the way. Even the crown prince had to respect eunuch Shui, but Princess Chongbing was very arrogant. Eunuch Shui was used to it, but still stopped her and said in a low voice, Princess, that's an honored guest from Western Zhou. Eunuch Shui lowered his voice even further. Western Zhou's Crown Prince Yi. Princess Chongbing was startled by these words and blurted out, his little sister came too? For the sake of the marriage? Tianning and Western Zhou were allied by marriage. Generations of marriage alliances had always happened, but in the past, it was always Tianning's princess or Junju who married off to the distant Western Zhou. Princess Chongbing heard that this time, Western Zhou's Princess Rongla wanted to marry into Tianning, but it wasn't clear who the bride would be. This Princess Rongla was extraordinary. She was of noble birth as the daughter of Western Zhou's empress and the crown prince's younger sister. Moreover, she was as beautiful as a flower and excelled in both civil and martial arts. She was known as the only woman in Cloud Realm continent who excelled in all three aspects. Currently, there were two guesses in the imperial court. Some guessed that Princess Rongla would marry Crown Prince Long Tianma and become Tianning's next empress. Others guessed that she would marry her senior martial brother from the same sect, His Highness Duke of Qin. The Duke of Qin's estate would then have two official consorts. No matter who this princess married, it would push Western Zhou and Tianning's cooperation to the next level. Of course, Princess Chongbing wanted nothing more than for Duanmu Yao to marry Imperial Uncle Qin immediately. That way, Han Yunqi's days would be difficult. Becoming the Duke of Qin's official consort with such an outstanding woman required more than just courage. Princess Rongla came as well. His Highness Duke of Qin should be accompanying her right now. As for whether she came for the marriage, this old servant isn't sure, Eunuch Shui said with a smile. Imperial Uncle Qin is accompanying her? Princess Chongbing was astonished. Ever since she was young, she'd never heard of Imperial Uncle Qin accompanying any woman. Eunuch Shui nodded his head mysteriously. He'd been wondering about this all this time as well. Yesterday, His Highness Duke of Qin and the Emperor had been talking behind closed doors about Madame Li's case, but he wasn't clear on the specifics. Who knew that Princess Rongla would be taken away by the Duke of Qin after coming to see the Emperor today? As he saw it, the Duke of Qin and Princess Rongla had a chance. At this moment, Han Yunqi was also in the crowd. Her brows were tightly knitted, and she silently bit her lip. She had guessed that Mu Luiyue would continue faking her illness, but she hadn't expected Mu Qingwu to replace Mu Luiyue to fulfill the bet. There was no need to mention Mu Luiyue's nature. In fact, regardless of whether she ran or not, her reputation was already ruined. Now, based on Mu Qingwu's integrity, perhaps it was time for the bet to come to an end. Han Yunqi was about to go forward when Princess Chongbing suddenly rushed out from the crowd and hugged Mu Qingwu's arm. Qingwu Gij, I won't allow you to do this. You won't. You won't. Chongbing was back? Han Yunqi was very surprised and stepped back. Mu Qingwu was also very surprised, but he quickly pushed Princess Chongbing's arm away. In a low voice, he said, Princess, men and women shouldn't touch each other. Please conduct yourself with dignity. Princess Chongbing wasn't afraid of the heavens or the earth, but she was afraid of Mu Qingwu. She didn't listen to anyone but Mu Qingwu. She didn't dare to move, but looked tearfully at Mu Qingwu. I won't allow you to do this. I won't allow it. Princess Chongbing's appearance caused the entire crowd to quiet down. A complicated look flashed through Mu Qingwu's eyes. He lowered his voice and said very seriously, Princess, everyone is watching. Don't cause trouble. I'm not causing trouble. Madame Li is a member of the Han family. Maybe Han Yunqi. He, however, before Princess Chongbing could finish her words, Mu Qingwu's gaze suddenly became sharp, scaring her into laughing more and more. She didn't even dare to continue. She had never seen Qingwu Gij so fierce before. It was as if she had committed an unforgivable mistake. Let's end the bet here. If we continue, the matter of the traitor will be exposed. The impact will be even greater, and the Duke of Qin, and the Emperor will be even more difficult to deal with. Now that everyone was watching, Mu Qingwu had no choice but to be serious. Seeing Princess Chongping shut up, Mu Qingwu raised his head and looked forward. His gaze was bright and open. "Everyone, please see clearly. The people of my general's residence will do it." After he finished speaking, he unbuttoned his shirt and took off his outer robes without hesitation. He was wearing a white robe and black boots. His tall and thin figure, standing in a strong military posture, gave people a feeling of openness and uprightness. For a moment, all the mocking and taunting voices, all the questioning and mocking gazes turned into reverence. Mu Qingwu, a true man. Princess Chongping covered her mouth as she stared blankly. At this moment, her heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. But besides her heartache, she also felt an inexplicable sense of pride. She was even more determined to marry no one but Mu Qingwu in this lifetime. Han Yunxi watched silently. She knew that there was no longer any need for her to step out and stop them. No one would be able to stop them. Mu Qingwu walked down the steps step by step as the crowd parted to make a path for him. As soon as Mu Qingwu walked down the last step, he immediately broke into a run. He passed through the throng of people and ran into Xuanwu Street. Along the way, there were countless commoners on both sides of the street. Everyone stopped to watch this scene, and quite a few even chased after Mu Qingwu's footsteps. In an instant, the entire streets of Tianning's capital were empty. From that day onwards, Mu Qingwu became a man revered by everyone. It was also from that day onwards that Mu Liuyue's reputation took a nosedive. Many daughters of influential families no longer had any dealings with her. Of course, this was a story for another day. Han Yunxi blended into the crowd and chased after Mu Qingwu. But as she chased after him, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She had clearly seen a very familiar figure in the window of a tea house by the side of the road. Long Feiyi. Although he was dressed in a low-key manner, Han Yunxi still recognized him at a glance. It was him, that's right. So this fellow was here. She had foolishly assumed that he was either at the solitary enclosure or in the palace, busy with the matter of the traitor. Who knew that he had so much free time that he'd run over to a tea house to drink tea? Actually, the matter of the traitor had nothing to do with her. Even if Long Feiyi stopped investigating the masked man, she didn't care. She only cared about the Han clan's crimes. This fellow still couldn't give her a satisfactory answer, so he was in the mood for leisure. Wasn't he going too far? Han Yunxi looked carefully and discovered that Long Feiyi seemed to be talking. Could it be that there was someone across from him? The window of the private room was on the second floor, so Han Yunxi could barely see Long Feiyi from where she was standing. She immediately climbed to the second floor of the tea house behind her to confirm that there was someone across from Long Feiyi. Unfortunately, she couldn't see who was across from Long Feiyi no matter how many windows she tried. Who could it be? Someone who could drink tea with Long Feiyi couldn't be a simple person. Could it be an important guest? But if it was an important guest, why would he be in a tea house on the main street? Han Yunxi became more and more suspicious. In the end, she decided to go to the tea house across the street to take a look. But just as she was about to leave, Long Feiyi stood up. They were about to leave. Han Yunxi became nervous. She leaned on the windowsill and didn't move. When she saw Long Feiyi disappear from the window, her gaze immediately shifted to the entrance of the tea house downstairs. She held her breath and waited. After a while, Long Feiyi walked out, and behind him was Han Yunxi's eyes widened. However, Duanmu Yao was still smiling like a flower. She was in a good mood and tried her best to keep up with him. Senior brother had promised to accompany her the whole day as a good host. She didn't dare ask for anything more. Han Yunxi was helped up by a kind-hearted passerby. She looked at the departing figure with a heavy heart. She clenched her fists until they hurt. Long Feiyi, what's your relationship with Duanmu Yao? Chapter 144. Han Yunxi stood there in a daze. No matter how the passers-by asked, she didn't respond. Until the familiar figure in front of her disappeared, she finally regained her senses from her own world. At this moment, the passers-by had all dispersed. However, Even though she had regained her senses, her heart still felt stifled and uncomfortable. Between Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yao, between senior brother and junior sister, could it be that there was really something going on? Otherwise, why would that fellow who never gave anyone an exception put down his status and accompany Duanmu Yao shopping? This was too unlike his style. When they were fighting against the poisonous python, Long Fei Yi was so anxious to protect Duanmu Yao's life. However, when they were in the Medicine Ghost Valley, Long Fei Yi didn't show any favoritism. Instead, he was more biased towards her. However, the reason why he was biased towards her back then was because they had the same goal, which was the lifeblood pill. If he didn't shoulder the Emperor's order back then, would he still stand on her side? As Han Yunqi thought and thought, she started to laugh. She laughed lightly at herself. What was wrong with her? She was only Long Fei Yi's princess consort in name. What did the relationship between him and his junior sister have to do with her? Senior brother and junior sister were originally in love with each other. What was so strange about it? Thinking of this, Han Yunqi took a deep breath to calm herself down. She even tried her best to pull up the corners of her mouth, revealing an open-minded smile. She maintained her smile and suddenly turned around. She wasn't going to walk in the same direction as them. Who knew that when she turned around, her movement was too big and she directly bumped into the person behind her. Han Yunqi was about to apologize when Hu knew that the person fiercely pushed her. Are you looking for death? How dare you bump into this young master? Han Yunqi focused and saw that the other party was a rich family's eldest young master. His figure was bloated, and there was a folding fan at the back of his head. He looked like a silk pants. Seeing Han Yunqi's appearance, the fat young master had evil intentions. Coldly, he said, "What are you looking at? Don't you have eyes? Can't you see that there's someone behind you? Do you think that everyone is like you, with eyes on the back of their head?" Han Yunqi was still smiling. "Io, this little girl's mouth is quite sharp." As the fat young master spoke, he took off his folding fan and reached out to Han Yunqi's chin. But who knew that before he could touch her, Han Yunqi raised her hand and opened the folding fan. Just as she raised her hand, she sprinkled something on the fat young master's face. The fat young master smelled a delicate fragrance and subconsciously sniffed hard. Who would have thought that after smelling it, he would actually start laughing foolishly? But it was just as Gu Beiwei said. The cold had entered his body and there were no other signs of his pulse. Strange. Han Yunqi seriously looked at him again. This kind of weak appearance was more like the state after being poisoned. Imperial Physician Gu, a cold can make you this weak? Isn't the foundation of your body a little too weak? Han Yunqi asked curiously. Unexpectedly, Gu Beiwei only nodded. This official has been a pot of medicine since childhood. My body can be considered healthy now, but it was common for me to get seriously ill every 2 or 3 days when I was younger. A few days ago, I served His Majesty in the palace and didn't rest or sleep for days on end. As soon as this cold entered my body, I fell ill like a collapsing mountain. He was actually a pot of medicine. Han Yunqi was very surprised. She never expected Tianing Country's chief imperial physician to be so sickly. If Gu Beiwei didn't say anything, who would have known? Could it be that you fell ill when you were young? Han Yunqi asked. Gu Beiwei's eyes flashed with bitterness before he said mildly, I heard grandfather say that I was born prematurely and was forced to use medicine to keep me alive. Now Han Yunqi was even more shocked, but also relieved. No wonder. In ancient times, premature babies had a very small chance of survival. Fortunately, this fellow had reincarnated right and had a divine doctor grandfather. Otherwise, even if they had medicine, they wouldn't know how to raise him. Han Yunqi only knew that Gu Beiwei's grandfather had brought him from the medical academy to Tianning's capital. As for his parents, she didn't know. Of course, she wasn't curious enough to ask about their origins. She teased with a smile, Looks like you'll have to ask His Majesty to reduce your workload. Gu Beiwei smiled faintly. Even though his face was pale, his smile was as warm as an April spring breeze. Esteemed Wang Fei, the matter you asked this one to look into last time. How is it? Han Yunqi grew excited. So this was the reason why this fellow had asked her to come here. She'd asked him to investigate how Han Kongan had become a director of Cloud Realm Medical Academy in the past. She wanted to find out if Lady Tianxin had any connections with the medical academy. Seeing Han Yunqi so agitated, Gu Beiwei hesitated a little before continuing. Esteemed Wang Fei, I'm very sorry. Cloud Realm Medical Academy's directors have all heard of Lady Tianxin, but they don't know her. Han Yunqi was stunned by his words. Lady Tianxin's name had spread throughout Tianning's capital in the past. She'd even agreed to let Han Kongan become a director of Cloud Realm Medical Academy. She'd assumed that Lady Tianxin had excellent connections within the academy. Who knew things would turn out like this? A director was considered a mid-level position in the medical academy. Above that were many important people with important positions. Perhaps they'd know Lady Tianxin, who had the confidence to make Han Kongan a director. If she was looking for connections, she'd have to find someone above that, right? Then do the Council of Elders and the Academy head know my mother? Han Yunqi asked anxiously. Gu Beiwei laughed at her words. Esteemed Wang Fei, this one can only find out this much. When my grandfather was still alive, he'd only seen the Medical Academy's elders a few times. Esteemed Wang Fei, perhaps Lady Tianxin really has nothing to do with the Medical Academy. With Lady Tianxin's power, it wouldn't be hard for her to support Han Kongan. Han Kongan's medical skills were indeed worthy of a director position in the past. Gu Beiwei analyzed objectively. All right, Han Yunqi knew she'd been impulsive, but this was the only clue to Lady Tianxin's identity. She was impatient. After drinking a few cups of tea in silence, Han Yunqi stopped making things difficult for Gu Beiwei. After all, this matter couldn't be rushed. She asked offhandedly, You invited me here just for this? There's one more thing. Gu Beiwei was a little embarrassed. Han Yunqi knew that her intuition wouldn't be wrong. This guy had invited her in private, so there must be something else. There's no one else here. Speak. She smiled faintly. Gu Beiwei's smile was extremely bashful and especially cute. Even though he was bashful, he was serious. Esteemed Wang Fei, this one heard about your bet with Miss Luyue, so? I'm curious how you knew to use goldfish to test for the 10,000 snake poison? The spectators that day didn't know, but Gu Beiwei was a doctor. He knew, and because he knew, he could tell that something was amiss. To be exact, there were two ways to test for poison. One was to test for poison, and the other was to test for poison. Testing for poison was the job of a poison master. Through smelling, tasting, and even reacting with other poisons, normal people wouldn't be able to understand the principles behind it. Testing for poison, on the other hand, was to use poison testing stones or people to test for poison. This was for amateurs to see. The 10,000 snake poison was very special, and the dosage in the tea leaves was very small. How did this woman know to test it with goldfish? Han Yunqi smiled when she heard this. Not long ago, Gu had also made a special trip to the Duke of Qin's residence to ask her this question. Even though Gu Beiwei didn't know much about poisons, he was still worthy of being called a godly doctor. Towards Gu Beiwei, Han Yunqi inexplicably let down her guard. She answered generously, I once saw it in an ancient book. Fortunately, I remembered it. Is it an ancient book left behind by Madame Tianxin? Gu Beiwei pursued. All right. She used Madame Tianxin as a shield to block all those who doubted her, so she might as well use it all the way. Yes, it was left behind by my mother. It seems that Madame Tianxin was also a poison master. Gu Beiwei said seriously. To tell a lie, one could only use countless lies to cover it up. Han Yunqi's mouth twitched, and she continued to nod. I think so. It's just that she didn't have the chance to show it. Han Yunqi didn't want to continue this topic. She rubbed her stomach and smiled. I'm late today. Let me treat you to a meal. Gu Beiwei wanted to reject immediately, but Han Yunqi was faster than him. She shouted, Waiter, waiter, bring the menu over. The waiter quickly opened the door and came in. Gu Beiwei couldn't reject him. Mingxiang Tea House had a wide variety of snacks that could be eaten as a main meal. This was Han Yunqi's first time eating outside. She ordered a lot of snacks in one go. Gu Beiwei looked at her. His eyes flashed with affection, but he didn't interfere. Soon, the dishes were delivered. However, the person who delivered the dishes shocked Han Yunqi. so much that she almost fell off her chair. Who was it? Even the Qin, unexpectedly. Before he could finish speaking, Han Yunqi suddenly turned around with a smile. Gu, didn't we say we were going to eat together? Let's go in. As she spoke, she dragged Gu Beiwei along. Imperial physician Gu, let's go together. I've troubled you several times, but I haven't had a chance to thank you yet. What was going on? Gu didn't understand, and Gu Beiwei didn't even have the time to react before Han Yunqi pulled the two of them into a private room. Han Yunqi turned around after entering the room. She didn't spare Long Feiyi another glance before slamming the door shut without hesitation. As soon as the door closed, she leaned against it and took several deep breaths. This time, she'd managed to dump Long Feiyi before he could dump her. This feeling was amazing. Gu and Gu Beiwei, who'd been pushed in by her, looked at each other in dismay. They sized up this woman suspiciously. What was she doing? Why did she need to take deep breaths just to close the door like a battle? Esteemed Wang Fei, this isn't appropriate. His Highness, Gu Beiwei was a bit uneasy. His Highness is very busy, so let's not disturb him any longer. Let's eat. Come. Let's all eat. Han Yunqi acted out of character and began to move her chopsticks carelessly. Gu Beiwei's brows furrowed even more as he watched. Meanwhile, Gu rubbed his chin playfully, as if he'd understood something. He smiled and sat down. Poison lass, that person just now was Western Zhou's Princess Rongla, right? Han Yunqi's chopsticks paused for a moment before she nodded. I heard that Western Zhou's emperor has plans for Princess Rongla to marry into Tianing country. It looks like Princess Rongla is here to find the prince consort this time, Gu teased. This time, Han Yunqi even paused in her chewing, but she quickly resumed chewing in large bites. As she ate, she said, it's a marriage for peace, not for a groom. There's no use in finding a groom. It's not up to her to decide who she marries. This is the princess of the first wife, the younger sister of Western Zhou's crown prince. If she's going to marry into Tianing, there's no way she'll be able to escape the selection. Gu's scorching gaze was fixed on Han Yunqi's small, moving mouth. Even the way this woman ate was different from other women. The more he looked at her, the more he liked her. When would the Long Feiyi divorce her? How about he just let her divorce the Long Feiyi? Han Yunqi really didn't know much about the marriage for peace. She feigned indifference as she asked, who are the candidates? At this moment, Gu Beiwei had also sat down on one side and was seriously sizing up Gu. He didn't interrupt the conversation. What's the relationship between esteemed Wang Fei and this guy? From the looks of it, they don't seem to be bad friends. The crown prince, the young general, and Gu purposely paused before continuing. The Duke of Qin. Han Yunqi gave Gu a deep look and chuckled. She abruptly stopped the topic. Eat. As she spoke, she glanced at Gu Beiwei. Imperial physician Gu, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Let's eat. Duanmu Yao was going to marry the Long Feiyi. She was the princess of the first wife, not Lady Su. How could she be willing to be a concubine? It looked like Duanmu Yao had a high chance of marrying the crown prince. She was destined to call Long Feiyi imperial uncle and call Gu Beiwei imperial aunt. Thinking of this, Han Yunqi's bad mood suddenly vanished like smoke in thin air. She picked up a sparkling and translucent chestnut cake and admired it with interest. Unexpectedly, Gu muttered to himself, I've heard that this princess is well-versed in literature, martial arts, and looks. She's extremely ambitious. I'm sure she won't look at anyone other than the Duke of Qin. It's very likely that the Duke of Qin's estate will have two main consorts. Two main consorts? Why didn't Han Yunqi think of this? After all, even the Empress had appeared in the East and West palaces. What more a princess consort? It was said that although the East and West palaces and the Left and Right palaces were both main consorts, there was still a hierarchy between them. This time, Han Yunqi's hands and mouth completely froze. A complicated look flitted across Gu's eyes, but he still teased in a probing tone. Come, esteemed Wang Fei. This chestnut cake should be dipped in vinegar. It's flavorful. How could Han Yunxi not understand Gu's meaning? She only smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. What did it have to do with her whether he married or she married? She was only angry because he didn't keep his promise. Han Yunxi ignored Gu's probing. She hadn't eaten much before she lost her appetite and rose to her feet. "You guys enjoy your meal," she said. "I'll be leaving first." She opened the door and saw that Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yao hadn't entered their private room, but were sitting in the middle of the main hall, closest to her private room. Long Fei Yi's naturally cold eyes grew even colder, but Han Yunxi only glanced at him briefly before looking straight ahead and leaving with large strides. Her back was stubborn and lonely. Long Fei Yi's gaze followed her down the stairs, his eyes cold and complicated beyond comprehension. Duanmu Yao saw it all and couldn't accept it. "Senior brother, let's eat. The food's getting cold." There was clearly a private room, but senior brother insisted on sitting here. After sitting for so long, he hadn't touched a single bite of the food on the table. Although he'd been ordered by Emperor Tianhui to accompany her and act as a host, he'd been taciturn and cold the entire way. She'd long gotten used to his cold personality, but he'd grown even more taciturn after meeting Han Yunxi at noon. Was it that woman who disturbed his heart? She'd already asked around last time at the Medicine Ghost Valley. Senior brother hadn't protected her, but wanted the life-blood pill as well. But what about this time? It wasn't clear whether Long Fei Yi heard Duanmu Yao's words, but he didn't touch his chopsticks. He only drank a mouthful of hot tea before speaking. "The driver is waiting by the door. You can go back by yourself later." "Senior brother, I heard that the night market in Tianning's capital city's Huaihua Alley." Before Duanmu Yao could finish, Long Fei Yi rose to leave. In a flash, Duanmu Yao's delicate features turned malevolent. Han Yunxi. It was because of Han Yunxi again. This enmity was set in stone. Chapter 146. After going out for a day, Han Yunxi was summoned by Grand Concubine Yi as soon as she returned to the estate. After treating the poison last time, she'd already performed acupuncture on Grand Concubine Yi twice. This would be the last time. Grand Concubine Yi truly cherished her life, so she couldn't afford to be careless. Murong Wanru had been punished to reflect on her mistakes behind closed doors, so Han Yunxi was especially quiet every time she came. She could talk to Grand Concubine Yi without any misgivings. Grand Concubine Yi lay lazily on the chaise lounge with Han Yunxi sitting by her side. Although her heart was heavy with worry, she quickly entered the state of mind as soon as she picked up the needles, concentrating wholeheartedly. Some doctors would get distracted and chat while treating patients, but she didn't like it. No matter if it was a difficult illness or something as simple as turning over a palm, she was always serious. Her attitude alone was like a good medicine that calmed the patient down and set their mind at ease. After an hour, Han Yunxi withdrew her needles one by one before speaking. "Mu Fei, the remaining poison in your body has been cleansed. There won't be any side effects, so you can set your mind at ease." Grand Concubine nodded. Although she was calm and collected, her posture languid and leisurely, her heart was filled with joy. She could finally stop worrying about her body. Seeing her so calm, Han Yunxi's eyes flashed with craftiness. "Actually, things like acupuncture and moxibustion are good for you too. It can expel poison and nourish your skin. At Mu Fei's age, your body must have accumulated plenty of toxins. Although they're not fatal, they'll settle on your skin and make it look dull. You might even develop brown spots." Hearing this, Grand Concubine Yi's eyes brightened with excitement. In the circle of noble women at her age, the most talked about topic was her face. In a few years, it'd be her body's condition. "In other words, you seem to be very good at it?" Grand Concubine Yi probed. "I can't say I'm good at it, but if I follow the procedures, there'll be results. Expelling poison and nourishing the skin can also prolong one's life." Han Yunxi was very modest. She wasn't trying to advertise, but expelling poison and nourishing the skin was a piece of cake for her. At these words, Grand Concubine Yi could no longer keep her calm. Hastily, she said, "Then why don't we try a course of treatment for Mu Fei first? It's Chinchia's honor. Tomorrow, I'll write up a treatment plan and have someone deliver it for Mu Fei to look over." Han Yunxi was very happy. This was a chance to get closer to Grand Concubine E. The closer she got to Grand Concubine E, the more dangerous it would be for Moron Wanru. Grand Concubine E was in a great mood. She stretched her neck as she asked, "I heard that Mu Qingwu took Mu Liu's place to honor the bet today? Fortunately, I won." Otherwise, Han Yunqi chuckled softly, but didn't continue. Grand Concubine E probably wanted her to lose back then. If she lost, she'd have to fulfill her promise and ruin her reputation. Then the Duke of Qin could divorce her. Of course, Grand Concubine E remembered that she'd hit someone while they were down, but it seemed she'd done it too many times. Instead of feeling awkward, she admonished, "I haven't taught you a lesson about this yet. In the future, don't make these kinds of bets with others. If you lose, you'll suffer a loss." E, the Grand Concubine E, who wanted her to suffer, was actually lecturing her like this? Han Yunqi felt overwhelmed by favor from Superior. It looked like her poison-expelling diplomacy was starting to take effect. It doesn't matter if Qinxie suffers a loss. But this time, someone with ulterior motives used the Han family incident to implicate Mu Fei. Qinxie truly deserves 10,000 deaths. As Han Yunqi spoke, she added, "Speaking of which, it's strange. Just who gave Lady Su the guts? Was she targeting Qinxie or Mu Fei?" Grand Concubine E would have forgotten about Lady Su's affairs if Han Yunqi hadn't brought it up. She wasn't suspicious, but certain that a trifling Lady Su had someone backing her up. Seeing Grand Concubine E remain silent, Han Yunqi added, "Actually, no matter if she was targeting Qinxie or Mu Fei, she was still targeting the Duke of Qin's estate. But Qinxie can't figure it out. Who in the world would have the guts to target the Duke of Qin's estate? Or perhaps," as she spoke, she gave Grand Concubine E a meaningful look. Or perhaps, she was just targeting Qinxie to sow discord between Qinxie and Mu Fei. At this, Grand Concubine E knitted her brows and looked seriously at Han Yunqi. Grand Concubine E had once suspected that the person behind Lady Su was that person from the palace. After all, the only person in the world who dared to provoke her Duke of Qin's estate was that person. But she quickly rejected the idea, because that person in the palace was interested in roping in Han Yunqi. She wouldn't go so far as to make a move against Han Yunqi. Now that she heard Han Yunqi's guesses, could it be that the person behind Lady Su was her own family, Wanru? But soon enough, Grand Concubine E rejected the idea as well. Wanru was suspicious, but she still couldn't believe that she'd have the guts to do such a thing. Perhaps Han Yunqi was trying to sow discord right now. Grand Concubine E withdrew her gaze and lay back lazily. What's done is done. There's no point in looking into it. It's better if you don't stir up trouble in the future. As expected, Grand Concubine E wasn't easy to deal with. Han Yunqi sighed with emotion in her heart. Qinxie was just saying, "Actually, guessing here, and there won't yield any results. It's better to go to the prisons and interrogate Lady Su." So speaking, she rose to her feet. "Mu Fei, it's getting late. Qinxie should go back as well." Grand Concubine E didn't urge her to stay, but waved a hand to dismiss her. Still, Han Yunqi's last words had planted a seed of restlessness in her heart. Lady Su had been sentenced to death by Grand Concubine E herself. Han Yunqi couldn't even visit her, but she knew that the paranoid Grand Concubine E would definitely pay a visit to the justice courts after her words today. She only hoped that Grand Concubine E wouldn't be too late. She was already late, but had been delayed by Grand Concubine Yi's side. By the time she reached the hibiscus courtyard, it was already late at night. The palace was pitch black, which meant that its master hadn't returned yet. "It's already so late. Do you still want to keep me company? Then tonight, will you come back?" Han Yunqi glanced at the palace from a distance before turning with her head bowed. Step by step, she walked towards the leisurely cloud pavilion. Zhao Mama saw her complexion and asked with concern, "Esteemed Wang Fei, what's wrong? Are you unwell? Did you catch a cold?" Han Yunqi finally raised her head, wanting to ask about Tianshan Kinzhou. That was because Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yao shared the same master. Last time she'd asked, but she didn't get to the bottom of it. But on second thought, she decided to forget it. What was the point of asking so much? What did it have to do with her whether or not he was taking another official wife? left or right. She didn't even like him. Staying at the Duke of Qin's estate was her fate. It was a place to settle down and get a foothold in Tianning's capital city. If anyone dared to cut off her path to survival, she'd never let them off. Thinking up to here, Han Yunxi exhaled and patted Zhao Mama on the shoulder. Then she went upstairs, closed the door, and went asleep. Zhao Mama's face was filled with bewilderment. What's wrong with her mistress today? Has she been possessed? That night, the exhausted Han Yunxi fell asleep unknowingly. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi and Emperor Tianhui were locked up in the imperial study to discuss the spy case until daybreak. Long Fei Yi had always been in charge of the Tianli spy case. He had absolute authority over the case, and even Emperor Tianhui couldn't interfere with how he dealt with the culprits. Even though Madame Li came from the Han family and had been hiding there for years, a single word from Long Fei Yi could turn the Han family into criminals. Even Emperor Tianhui wouldn't pursue the matter. But things were different now. Madame Li's last words had made Emperor Tianhui impatient to get rid of the rest of the Han family to prevent future troubles. He even wanted to hold Han Yunxi accountable. Long Fei Yi had been ordered to accompany Princess Rongla for an entire day before Emperor Tianhui finally relented and gave him a chance to discuss the matter. This was a business transaction, not because Long Fei Yi was powerless. In fact, it proved that Emperor Tianhui was powerless against his little brother, Long Fei Yi. Otherwise, who would dare disobey an imperial order? Who would have the right to bargain? Seeing Long Fei Yi's icy expression, Emperor Tianhui's fists clenched tightly in his sleeves. He'd always wanted to get rid of the Duke of Qin, but Tianning couldn't do without him. The valiant and powerful Northernly Empire was like a pack of wolves and tigers. If not for the Duke of Qin's presence, they would have moved against Tianning long ago. He hated a man like this to the bone, but he had no choice but to rely on him. Emperor Tianhui truly felt sullen. The Han family's matters have been settled. If Imperial Brother has nothing else to do, it's time for morning court, Long Fei Yi said mildly. It was enough for an entire night of verbal sparring. Emperor Tianhui didn't reply directly, but simply said, Crown Prince Yi and Princess Rongla will only return after the new year. You can reconsider the marriage alliance. The marriage alliance is a matter between two countries. Imperial Brother should consult with Western Zhou's Emperor more. It's inconvenient for Chundi to interfere. After the new year, Chundi has plans to travel and have no time to share Imperial Brother's burdens. Long Fei Yi refused outright. In the end, Emperor Tianhui narrowed his eyes and said coldly, the Duke of Qin has worked hard over the matter of the spy. It's time for you to rest. Why don't you hand over the matter of the spy case to someone else so you can recuperate? Was he planning to take back his power? Long Fei Yi's icy lips curved into a mocking smile as he said, Chundi hasn't even reported, but Imperial Brother already knows that there's a follow-up to the spy case. Imperial Brother is wise and brilliant. Emperor Tianhui grew alarmed at his words. Duke of Qin, what do you mean? Madame Li isn't the true mastermind behind the scenes. There's still another person behind her. Chindi's preliminary investigations show that it should be someone from Northern Li's imperial clan. As for who that person is and whether they'll offend our Tianning, that's still unknown. Long Fei Yi replied truthfully. Emperor Tianhui never thought that Madame Li still had someone behind her back. If they hadn't found out who that person was, then it meant that Tianning's capital city was in danger. It was impossible to guard against a spy in the first place, much less the fact that it involved poisons. Madame Li's ambush was deep and her poison skills were formidable. Emperor Tianhui had seen it all with his own eyes. Wouldn't the person behind her be even more dangerous? Poisons were an unorthodox art. Among all of Tianning's civil and military officials, who besides Long Fei Yi dared to take on such a hot potato? Who else was qualified to do so? Emperor Tianhui's eyes narrowed into slits as he coldly examined his young and promising younger brother. Long Fei Yi allowed him to look as he pleased, his expression cold and his eyes cold. His entire being exuded a natural air of nobility. Although he was in a side seat, he was even more lofty and inviolable than Emperor Tianhui. Finally, Emperor Tianhui stood up and said, Continue the investigation. So speaking, he ordered eunuch Shui, Change your clothes and attend court. Satisfied, Long Fei Yi rose to his feet. Chindi obeys. I'll take my leave. Although Emperor Tianhui hadn't said a word, he'd compromised. Besides the Duke of Qin, no one else would be able to punish the Han family for their crimes. Protecting the Han family is a reward for your meritorious service in testing the poison, Long Fei Yi explained. Han Yunqi was overjoyed. Madame Su and Madame Li were no longer related to the Han family. Protecting the Han family was equivalent to protecting little Er's family. She immediately bowed. On behalf of the entire Han family, this concubine thanks your highness for your grace. Is there anything else? Long Fei Yi asked. Anything else? Was there anything else? What did he want her to ask? If she asked, would he answer? Han Yunqi thought for a moment, stood up, and smiled. That's all. I won't disturb your highness any longer. Saying so, she resolutely turned to leave. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi coldly said, Stop. Han Yunqi abruptly stopped, her heart skipping a beat. What did he want to do by telling her to stop? Ask what? Was there anything else other than the incident at Mingxiangin? Was he going to warn her again with those behave and decorum words? She hadn't even questioned him about Duanmu Yao. If the title of husband and wife was a kind of restriction, then it shouldn't only restrict her, right? The more she thought about it, the harder she bit her lip. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi didn't do anything. He didn't ask anything. He held up the oil paper umbrella at the side and passed it to Han Yunqi from behind. His voice was cold. Take it away. He was very tall and held the oil paper umbrella high. She looked up and saw his hand holding the umbrella. His hand was very big and covered the entire handle. He didn't ask about the incident at the tea house just like that. Han Yunqi stared blankly for a while before saying, There's no need, this concubine. But before she could finish speaking, he suddenly closed in on her from behind, domineering and forceful. For a moment, she only felt his breath behind her, as if she had been drawn into a strong sphere of strength and couldn't break free. Take it away, he said sternly. Han Yunqi pursed her lips. Take it away then. She put on the fox fur cloak in her hand and reached out to grab the oil paper umbrella. Long Fei Yi didn't seem to expect her to do this and didn't immediately let go. Han Yunqi tugged again before he finally let go. Thus, Han Yunqi put on his fox fur cloak and held up his black oil paper umbrella as she strode away. Long Fei Yi's handsome brows slowly knitted together. Even after Han Yunqi's back disappeared into the wind and snow, and even after the lights in the distant leisurely cloud loft were lit, he still stood in the same spot. She didn't know how long he had been standing there, but his eyes were dark and gloomy, uncertain. When Han Yunqi returned to the loft, she even brought the umbrella upstairs. She threw it aside harshly. She had already taken off the fox fur cloak and threw it beside the oil paper umbrella. She glared fiercely and suddenly rushed up, raising her foot to step on it. But for some reason, she didn't step on it. Damn it! She cursed and lay down heavily on the bed. She hated this feeling too much. Her heart hurt so much that she wanted to die, but she didn't know what to feel. She wanted to explode, but she didn't know what to explode with. Didn't that guy keep his promise to protect little Er? He even protected the Han family. So why didn't she feel happy at all? Han Yunqi pulled the blanket over her head, refusing to think about it. She told herself that the matter of the northernly spy had come to an end. There was nothing between them anymore. He would continue on his path, and she would continue on her single-plank bridge. Well water wouldn't interfere with river water. It was another sleepless night. The next day, Han Yunqi woke up early. On the way to the Han family, she saw the notice from the Supreme Court. Madame Li, as the main culprit, had died, and Han Ruoxue, as an accomplice, was sentenced to life imprisonment even though she didn't know the truth. As a result, the case of Madame Li and her daughter became a normal case. There was no traitor involved, and the Han family was justified in not being implicated. As for how Long Fei Yi would deal with the aftermath, and whether he would continue to investigate the masked man, those were still secrets. Han Yunqi told herself not to get involved with him anymore. When Han Yunqi arrived at the Han family, she finally felt at ease and handed the Han medical cannon to Little Ear. This was the Han family's property, so it should belong to the Han family's descendant. Little Ear was a very talented child. Han Yunqi believed that as long as he was given a good environment, one day, he would make the Han family stand up again in the medical world. In the past, Madame Su had always been in charge of the Han family. Now that Madame Su was gone, Madame Li was gone, and the other concubines had fled, the burden fell on 7th Madame's shoulders. With Han Yunqi's support, the covetous people in the Han family didn't dare to make things difficult for her. Instead, they curried favor with 7th Madame and brought many expensive gifts to visit. After a few days, 7th Madame recovered. Han Yunqi called the accountant and housekeeper to discuss. Although the Han family's treasury had a lot of money, and 7th Madame and Little Ear didn't have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives, the Han family's business wasn't very big now. All the medical centers and pharmacies were closed, and their expenses were not much different from before. Therefore, it was necessary to reduce expenses. After a round of discussion, Han Yunqi discovered that 7th Madame might be frail and weak, but she wasn't stupid. She had plenty of original views on managing affairs and managing finances. What she lacked were opportunities and guts. Little Chen Xiang, in the future, you will follow 7th Madame. If 7th Madame doesn't dare to do it, you will support her. Han Yunqi teased. Little Chen Xiang pouted as she looked at her master. It was as if a bottle of mixed feelings had been overturned in her heart. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. She couldn't bear to part with her master, but she also couldn't bear to part with 7th Madame and Little Ear. After serving them for so many days, she had long developed feelings for them. Seeing that Little Chen Xiang didn't speak, Little Ear secretly tugged at the corner of her clothes. Little Chen Xiang's heart immediately softened. Master, then can I go to the Wang Fu to see you? Han Yunqi was happy. Of course. 7th Madame also couldn't bear to leave Little Chen Xiang. When she heard this, she immediately wanted to bow and express her gratitude. Han Yunqi hurriedly stopped her. In the future, when I return to my maternal home, we don't have to be so particular. Although this maternal home wasn't powerful, it was comfortable. It was also a backing. Chapter 148. After several days of snow, the sky finally cleared up. It was as if the sky had been washed, a beautiful azure blue. After that bet, Mu Luiyue didn't attend any gatherings in the circle. She spent her days hiding in her room, depressed, and her temper grew worse and worse. With a bang, another expensive vase was smashed. The servant girls surrounded the door, but no one dared to enter. At first, General Mu and Mu Qingwu would still come over to take a look, but now they were numb to it. They were more worried that this lass's reputation was so bad that marrying into a good family in the future would be a big problem. Someone come. Someone come. Mu Luiyue shouted angrily. A servant girl timidly ran over, not daring to get too close. Did Princess Chongping come? Did I not know if she came? Mu Luiyue questioned. Her only hope was Princess Chongping. However, ever since the incident, Princess Chongping hadn't come even once. The plum blossom meet was just around the corner, yet she still hadn't received an invitation. Was she being completely abandoned? No. The servant girl replied cautiously. She immediately comforted her. Miss, maybe the princess is busy. She'll come over in a few days. Busy with what? The plum blossom meet? Who did she invite? Did she invite Han Yunqi? Mu Luiyue asked anxiously. She had long heard that this year's plum blossom meet was hosted by Princess Chongping. She had the final say on who to invite. How could the servant girl know so much? She immediately found an excuse and fled. Miss, please wait a moment. This servant girl will go ask around. With Mu Luiyue's reputation being so bad, Princess Chongping naturally wouldn't come. She was indeed busy with the plum blossom meet. The first invitation was sent to the Duke of Qin's estate, and it was for Han Yunqi. These past few days, Han Yunqi had been shuttling back and forth between the Han estate and the Duke of Qin's estate, dealing with the aftermath of the Han estate. After that night, she hadn't seen Long Fei Yi again. She had long locked the windows of the attic, so she had no idea if that fellow had returned at night. She also had no idea if he was busy or not. As for news of the Western Zhou princess, she didn't try to find out. Her days went on like this. Occasionally, she'd visit Grand Concubine E to help her, expel poison and nourish her beauty and chat a bit. Although their relationship wasn't very close, it was much better than before. During this period, Gu had sent a few cans of premium Nanshan black tea leaves, but she threw them all away. No one knew that she didn't go to Nanshan to pick the black tea leaves for herself. At this time, she had just returned when Steward Xia came looking for her. Esteemed Wang Fei, esteemed Imperial Concubine Dowager, wants you to go over. What is it? Han Yunqi didn't understand. She just performed acupuncture on Grand Concubine this morning. Besides that, Grand Concubine would never seek her out. This subordinate doesn't know. Consort Dowager is waiting. Esteemed Wang Fei should hurry over, Steward Xia replied. Could it be that something had happened to Madame Su? Grand Concubine had ignored her multiple indirect inquiries. She couldn't get any news from the justice courts, so she could only try to figure things out. Han Yunqi hurried over, but as soon as she entered, she saw an unexpected person. Murong Wanru. What was going on? This white lotus had actually appeared. Did Grand Concubine never suspect Murong Wanru, or was she covering for her despite knowing the truth? She was just an adopted daughter, so was it worth it? Sister-in-law, you're finally here. It's cold outside, so hurry and have a cup of hot tea. Murong Wanru acted as if nothing had happened. She was especially attentive and warm as she pulled Han Yunqi to sit and poured tea. Han Yunqi politely declined and asked, Mu Fei, Steward Xia said you were in a hurry to find me? Grand Concubine knitted her brows as she handed over a pink invitation card. It was double-layered with flowers and carved with a thin, delicate plum blossom. Han Yunqi took a look and immediately understood what was going on. This was an invitation to the plum blossom meet. Unlike the other invitees, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was no good banquet, no good table. She was the least interested in such things. The so-called plum blossom meet only invited the rich and noble. Moreover, most of the guests were young women. Although it was said to admire the plum blossoms, it was actually a group of women vying for attention, forming cliques, and trampling on each other. Every time something happened at the plum blossom meet, it would spread and become the talk of the noble ladies. How boring. Han Yunqi hesitated before saying, Mu Fei, Qinqia's body isn't well. I don't know if this banquet can. But before she could finish, Murong Wanru spoke up. Sister-in-law, you mustn't not go. The Empress's body isn't well, so Princess Chongping is hosting this time. If you don't go, what will she think? Han Yunqi was startled. She didn't expect things to turn out like this. If that was the case, then this banquet wouldn't be a good one. Han Yunqi still remembered the scene at the general's estate last time. Mu Qingwu had run off on the streets, so Chongping probably held a grudge against her. Heaven knows what kind of trap she prepared for her this time. Mu Fei, Qinqia is a coarse person without any talent or learning. Coincidentally, my body isn't well, so I'm afraid I'll lose face for you if I go. Han Yunqi refused again. It was too easy for her to refuse Princess Chongping. She could just refuse without giving her face, but the effects of this matter weren't small. She had to get past Grand Concubine E first. Grand Concubine E still didn't speak, so Murong Wanru spoke up again. Sister-in-law is too modest. It's just admiring the plum blossoms. What talent or learning is needed? If sister-in-law doesn't go, won't Wanru be left alone? Moreover, sister-in-law is going as a representative of our Duke of Qin's estate. If you don't go, then Wanru might as well not go. Now Han Yunqi understood why Murong Wanru's ban had been lifted without any warning. As it turned out, she'd been invited as well. She opened up the invitation and saw that it was dated 3 days later. Han Yunqi knitted her brows and didn't speak. Finally, the silent Grand Concubine spoke up. Yunqi, if you don't go, I'll lose even more face. A few days ago, they were already discussing whether or not Chongping would invite you. Do you dare to go? Yunqi? Heavens! With a thump, the teacup in Murong Wanru's hands fell to the ground. She was frightened. Mu Fei was calling Han Yunxi by her name so intimately and even discussing things with her so nicely. Murong Wanru's face was ghastly white. She'd been caught unprepared. She thought Mu Fei would angrily reprimand Han Yunxi, but who knew Mu Fei's attitude was like this? What had happened between Mu Fei and Han Yunxi while she was locked up in the palace? She'd just been released and hadn't had time to ask her confidant about the situation. Seeing this, Grand Concubine looked over unhappily. "What's the matter with you?" Han Yunxi was secretly laughing in her heart. It didn't matter that Murong Wanru was released. She'd be crying in the days to come. Mu Fei, Chunxia heard that as long as an unmarried woman wins a prize at the Plum Blossom Meet and becomes famous, matchmakers will trample all over their doorsteps afterwards. "I don't know if it's really that exaggerated?" Han Yunxi asked seriously. Grand Concubine smiled. "It's exaggerated. It's exaggerated. Still, it can't be considered fake. As long as one dazzled the crowd at the Plum Blossom Meet, they'd attract the admiration of countless gentlemen who'd want to marry them. Thus, the Plum Blossom Meet was a sacred gathering that women in the capital yearned for even in their dreams. So it's like that. Then I'll go with Wanru. That girl's reached marriageable age," Han Yunxi said with a smile. Murong Wanru's heart skipped a beat at these words. Han Yunxi, that slut, really wanted to marry her off? It wasn't up to her to care about her marriage. "Wanru, you have to perform well. Mu Fei, you should have Steward Xia thicken our doorsteps later." Han Yunxi teased. A complicated look flitted past Grand Concubine Yi's eyes, but she didn't speak. Han Yunxi added, "Mu Fei, or have you already chosen a family for Wanru?" Grand Concubine immediately shook her head. "There's nothing like that. Don't start rumors." "Mu Fei, Wanru's not young anymore. If she's not anxious, aren't you anxious for her sake as well?" Han Yunxi asked next. Murong Wanru felt like her lungs were about to explode. Neither she nor Mu Fei were anxious, so why was this slut so anxious? She couldn't accept everything she'd seen and heard. That very night, she found Gue Mama and a few servant girls to ask about the situation. "What a Han Yunxi. It's only been a few days, but you've already dispelled Mu Fei's enmity towards you. If I keep you here, how am I supposed to keep a foothold in the Duke of Qin's estate?" The next day, Murong Wanru immediately made a secret appointment with Princess Changping. Chapter 149. 3 days later, the Plum Blossom Meet was held as scheduled. The Imperial Plum Blossom Garden on the outskirts of the city was filled with the fragrance of flowers. Plum blossoms were in full bloom, reflecting the snow. From a distance, it looked like a dreamy sea of flowers. This year's plum blossoms had bloomed especially early and luxuriantly. Beneath the sea of plum blossoms, a banquet had long been set up. Princess Changping and Crown Prince Long Tianma sat on the left and right of the main seats. The first seat to the Crown Prince's left was Western Zhou's Princess Rongla, Duanmu Yao. Although there were quite a few distinguished scholars attending this banquet, most of them were women. Long Tianma hadn't wanted to come, but he'd received Imperial Father's orders last night to accompany the princess. A few days ago, someone had spread a rumor that Imperial Uncle Qin had been accompanying Princess Rongla the entire time. It looked like the rumors were false. Imperial families were the most heartless. Every woman in the imperial family, regardless of whether they were wives or concubines, was a tool. When they were useful, they'd be fought over until their heads bled. When they weren't useful, they'd be cast aside like a pair of worn-out shoes, to say nothing of a crown prince's woman. If Duanmu Yao wanted to marry him, he wouldn't even blink an eye. Unfortunately, everyone knew that Duanmu Yao's heart was with the Duke of Qin. Although Western Zhou and Tianning were allied by marriage, they each had their own plans. Imperial Father desperately hoped that Princess Rongla could marry him as soon as possible so that the two countries could cooperate further. Especially when it came to the defense of the northeast border, they could reach a consensus as soon as possible to resist the Tianli dynasty. Unfortunately, Western Zhou's emperor had already said that Princess Rongla had to find her ideal husband before marrying him. Who else but Imperial Uncle Qin could be her ideal husband? However, Duanmu Yao still hadn't made a public statement about this secret. No one dared to guess Imperial Uncle Qin's stance on this matter, so the matter was delayed. Yao Yao, try this plum blossom tea. Can you only drink it in Tianing? Long Tianma found a topic to talk about and called her Yao Yao to close the distance between them. But Duanmu Yao didn't give him any face at all. Instead, she called him Your Highness Crown Prince and maintained her distance. Your Highness Crown Prince, is it more appropriate to call me Rongla? Long Tianma's eyes flashed with anger, but he hid it very well. This woman was very beautiful, and she was indeed good at both civil and martial arts. However, from the bottom of his heart, he really looked down on this woman. If not for the fact that she was the legitimate princess of Western Zhou, he would not even look at her. Although he was angry, Long Tianma's tone was still gentle. I heard that Uncle Qin will travel after the new year. Does Princess Rongla know where he will go? Duanmu Yao turned to look at him, shock written all over her face. She hadn't gone back with her imperial brother, but had stayed in Tianing to celebrate the new year. She was hoping to find a way to settle the marriage after the new year, but she never expected her senior brother to be heading out. Emperor Tianhui had promised her in secret that she'd find her Mr. Right, but did those words still count? Long Tianma was very satisfied with Duanmu Yao's reaction. Princess Rongla doesn't seem to know about this yet. It seems like I'll have to wait for Imperial Aunt Qin to come before asking her. As he spoke, he picked up the teacup and took a sip. But Duanmu Yao's face had completely changed. Han Yunqi? How could Han Yunqi know senior brother's whereabouts? How was that possible? By now, most of the invitees had already arrived and were chatting in twos and threes. Of course, the hottest topic was Han Yunqi. Would Han Yunqi come? The Plum Blossom Meet wasn't just a place to test one's interpersonal relationships, but their talents as well. Han Yunqi's interpersonal relationships aside, she didn't even have a single close friend in the circle. As for her talents, that was the highlight of the day. Han Yunqi was a commoner's daughter. How could a medical family compare to the imperial clan and nobles? Moreover, she hadn't been favored since childhood and hadn't received any training. What talents could she have? What gave her the confidence to participate in the Plum Blossom Meet? The Plum Blossom Meet wasn't just for eating, chatting, and admiring the flowers. Apparently, many people in and out of the palace were betting on whether Han Yunqi would dare to show up today. But amidst the whispers, a eunuch announced in a loud voice, Qin Wangfei has arrived. Miss Wanru has arrived. She's here? She really dared to show up? In an instant, everyone looked towards the source of the voice and saw Han Yunqi dressed in an elegant and refined snow-white dress. Her entire body was snow-white, with only a plum blossom jade belt around her waist. White dress and red jade. This was such a simple combination, but it made people's eyes light up. She instantly defeated all the luxuriously dressed women present. Of course, Murong Wanru, who was walking beside her, also looked dull. Due to Han Yunqi's status, even if everyone was unwilling, they still stood up to welcome her. However, Duanmu Yao was sitting calmly and stood out among the standing crowd. Han Yunqi walked closer before lazily standing up. She didn't even greet her. Long time no see. She hated being called esteemed Wang Fei, and hated being called Qin Wang Fei even more. Han Yunqi didn't get angry, but smiled innocently. Princess Rongla must have been here for a few days. I thought your senior brother would bring you home for tea, but you never showed up. At the very least, Duanmu Yao was the same as her, unaware that Long Fei was leaving after the new year. Thinking up to here, Han Yunqi's mood improved without her noticing. While they were chatting, a eunuch's loud announcement drew everyone's attention once again. Marquis Pingbei's estate, Gongzi Che has arrived. Marquis Pingnan's estate, Gongzi Mu has arrived. Marquis Pingbei and Marquis Pingnan were known as the North and South Lords. Although they were well known, they didn't have a good reputation. Marquis Pingbei's only son, Zhangsun Che, was also known as the North Lord. He was dressed in white robes and held a folding fan in his hand, looking extraordinary and distinguished. He was not only famous for his scholarly talents, but also for his dissolute nature. He just turned 18 this year, but already had 10 concubines. There were rumors that he'd even touched his father's concubines. He was simply a beast in human form. Marquis Pingnan's only son, Li Muge, was known as Nan Gongzi. He was dressed in purple and similarly held a folding fan in his hand. At first glance, he looked clean and pure, like a banished immortal. However, upon closer inspection, one would see that his hand was holding a lotus flower and his feet were taking small, quick steps. He was more feminine than a woman. His homosexual tendencies had long been an open secret. The appearance of the North and South Lords caused quite a stir. Dissolute and distinguished men were women's poison, while feminine men were women's best friends. These two gentlemen's popularity had always been at its peak. This time, Princess Chongping was hosting the banquet and had invited quite a few men. However, Princess Chongping had never interacted with them. Why did she invite them this time? Not minding the crowd's timid discussions, Princess Chongping playfully glanced at Murong Wanru. Murong Wanru returned a meaningful look. The two had a tacit understanding, as if they were hiding some secret. Han Yunqi was also puzzled. She sized up the North and South Lords and felt that something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Very quickly, everyone had arrived and the banquet began. This year's plum blossom meet had the theme of plum blossom tea and pastries. All kinds of unique pastries and tea were served. Unfortunately, none of them were in the mood to taste it. Looking at Han Yunqi sitting high above, they were filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. They were also eager to give it a try. They couldn't wait to see Han Yunqi make a fool of herself. A commoner girl with a lower birth than them was simply an insult to the 3 words, Qin Wang Fei. She actually dared to sit so calmly and leisurely. Today's opportunity had come. They wanted to beat this woman back to her original form. They wanted to break her laughable pride and blind arrogance. They wanted to let her know that even if she really thought of herself as a scallion, no one would eat her as dipping sauce. As a matter of fact, Princess Chongping hadn't even spoken yet, but there was already someone who couldn't restrain herself. This person was none other than the youngest daughter of the Minister of Personnel, Madame Su's younger sister, Su Yunrong. She stood up and respectfully said, "Your Highness, the plum blossoms are in full bloom this year. Why don't we sing the plum blossoms?" Sing the plum blossoms? Princess Chongping had been waiting for someone to speak. She was overjoyed and excitedly stood up. Miss Su is so refined. This is a good idea. Chapter 150. This was a good idea? Han Yunqi was thunderstruck. She knew very well that between women, the most basic form of competition was the zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, and song. However, these women had been fighting since they were young. Weren't they tired of it? She was already tired of reading harem novels. What was so good about this idea? Han Yunqi's interest was waning, but the crowd's excitement was ignited. They immediately became excited. Praising the plum blossoms is appropriate for the occasion. We won't let down this garden of flowers. I was just about to suggest that everyone compose a poem. We'll let Her Highness pick a few good ones and make them into a booklet. We'll send it to the Empress later. Good, good, good. This idea is wonderful. This group of women had been waiting for this opportunity from the start. Whether it was praising the plum blossoms, painting the plum blossoms, or playing the zither, they were all well prepared. How could it be difficult for them? However, Han Yunqi was miserable. What did a trashy daughter who had been abandoned at a young age know? From her usual behavior and words, it was obvious that she was a vulgar person. Her performance was too exciting. Princess Chongping chuckled as she looked towards Han Yunqi. Imperial Qin Aunt, what do you think of praising the plum blossoms? Han Yunqi's mouth twitched. Before she could reply, the crowd had already started talking. You still haven't seen Qin Wangfei compose a poem? Today, everyone is in for a treat. Qin Wangfei, I heard that you're a talented woman. The Duke of Qin admires your talent the most. Esteemed Wangfei, you mustn't hide anything today. You must broaden everyone's horizons. Let everyone see what kind of talent His Highness Duke of Qin has set his eyes on. Although these words sounded like flattery, they were actually mocking, cutting, and trying to kill her. Han Yunqi took in the crowd's jealousy and unwillingness, but didn't take it to heart. You can be envious, jealous, and hateful. I'll keep my cool and clear. Beside her, Duanmu Yao could no longer sit still. She smiled and said, "This princess is puzzled. How did esteemed Wang Fei marry into the Duke of Qin's household? So esteemed Wang Fei caught His Highness's eye because of her talent. This is truly inconceivable. Why don't esteemed Wang Fei compose a poem first?" Duanmu Yao's words were truly harsh. Everyone knew about the engagement between Han Yunqi and the Duke of Qin, but Duanmu Yao had chosen to say such a thing. This was a vicious slap to Han Yunqi's face, who knew that at this time, Princess Changping would actually add oil to the fire. Her face was full of shock. Imperial Qin aunt, did you think Imperial Qin uncle married you because you learned from him? I didn't even know about it before. Am I right? How should Han Yunqi answer? If she answered yes and couldn't prove her talent, wouldn't she be laughed at? If she answered no, Duanmu Yao and Princess Changping would definitely use her engagement and the fact that she'd walked into the Duke of Qin's household to humiliate her. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone's eyes turned to Han Yunqi, waiting for her to answer with schadenfreude. Is that not the case? Esteemed Wang Fei, why don't you say something? Duanmu Yao smiled cold. Just as everyone was waiting for Han Yunqi to be at a loss, Han Yunqi smiled faintly. She was especially beautiful and confident. She unhurriedly said, "Talent can be considered one of the reasons." This woman's tone wasn't small. Looks like everyone guessed correctly. Imperial Qin aunt's talent isn't ordinary. Let's wait and see today. Princess Changping's tone changed. Duanmu Yao's face was full of disdain. Then would Qin Wang Fei please compose a plum blossom poem first? That's right. You must compose one first. Hurry. Princess Changping impatiently urged. She was nervous. Everyone's eyes never left Han Yunqi. Even the men present, including Long Tianma, looked over. Han Yunqi was definitely riding a tiger and couldn't get off. She actually dared to speak so arrogantly. Let's see how she'll deal with this. But who knew that Han Yunqi would seriously ask, "Princess Changping, are you sure you want me to go first?" Princess Changping was startled, but immediately nodded. What's there to be sure about? Imperial Qin aunt, don't dawdle. It's not like you have any ability, so why are you dawdling? Can't you see that everyone's waiting? I'm looking forward to it. Duanmu Yao smiled arrogantly. Esteemed Wang Fei, don't be so modest. Let's begin. Han Yunqi, this princess must see how you can open your mouth today. The entire crowd quieted down as everyone waited. The tension in the air gradually dissipated. However, Han Yunqi looked towards Duanmu Yao again. Princess Rongla is a guest, so let her go first. Excuses. Excuses. Han Yunqi, you're finished. I knew you couldn't do it. Before Duanmu Yao could reply, Princess Changping spoke up. Imperial Qin aunt, you really know how to joke? Princess Rongla is Cloud Realm Continent's most famous female poet. She's already published multiple poetry anthologies. Our Imperial Academy's textbooks contain her poems as well. We all know how to memorize a few. Of course, she has to be the finale. You should go first. Duanmu Yao's face was full of pride as she accepted Princess Changping's exaggeration. Han Yunqi smiled insincerely. Why didn't Changping say she grew up reading Duanmu Yao's poems? How about that Miss Su go first? Han Yunqi declined again, looking towards Su Yorong. Princess Changping immediately added, Imperial Qin aunt, she only has 5 or 6 poems a year that can be included in the anthologies. Don't let her make a fool of herself. You two aren't on the same level. Then which one of you can go first? Han Yunqi sighed with emotion. Princess Changping was amused. She knew Han Yunqi would be anxious. She calmly introduced, Imperial Qin aunt. That one is the daughter of the Minister of Rites, Shang Wanqing. She could compose poems at the age of 3 and was famous in the capital at 7. That one is the Duke family's 7th young Miss Suing Xue. Her poems are well known in the capital. Also, this one is even more extraordinary. Her poems make even the grand scholar admit his inferiority. Princess Changping flaunted a bit before smiling. Of course, None of them can enter Imperial Qin Uncle's eyes. They can't compare to you, so don't decline anymore. Come on, have a poem. Han Yunqi was truly frightened. She didn't expect there to be so many experts. But if Princess Changping wanted to use these methods to raise her up, then make her fall even more miserably, then she was gravely mistaken. She lazily stretched her waist and looked at the crowd. Smiling, she said, Changping, you mean to say that they're all inferior to me? If I go first, then they won't have to waste any more time, right? When these words came out, everyone was stunned. Princess Changping sucked in a breath of cold air. What did Han Yunqi mean by these words? Her tone was even more arrogant than before. Changping, is that right? Han Yunqi asked again. Princess Changping couldn't believe it, but she still nodded resolutely. Yes, Han Yunqi, since you want to court death, then I'll let you die even more miserably. Han Yunqi nodded her head in satisfaction. She really didn't want to listen to a bunch of women composing poems in such a genteel manner. At this time, Duanmu Yao couldn't help but ask, does esteemed Wang Fei mean that you want to have a one-on-one competition with this princess? As if afraid that Han Yunqi wouldn't answer, she imitated the tone Han Yunqi used to ask Princess Changping. Is that right? Who knew that Han Yunqi wouldn't even think before replying? Of course it is. This. Duanmu Yao didn't expect this and immediately said, then don't dawdle, you can start. However, Han Yunqi sighed softly and said, AI, I'm afraid that if my poem is too good, you'll be too embarrassed to compose another one. I'll give you a chance. You go first. Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone present heard it clearly. This woman was too arrogant. She was arrogant to the point of ignorance. She actually dared to provoke Princess Rongla, the publicly acknowledged talented woman. Duanmu Yao angrily stood up and glared at Han Yunqi with wide, cold eyes. This woman was using her own ignorance to humiliate her. She couldn't take it anymore and directly called out her name. Han Yunqi, if you can defeat this princess today, then this princess will never compose any more poems. However, Han Yunqi didn't even think about it before replying straightforwardly, no problem. You. Duanmu Yao couldn't believe her ears. Seeing the fearless light in Han Yunqi's eyes, she suddenly felt an inexplicable fear. However, she quickly ignored it. Not to mention that this woman hadn't received any education and didn't know how to compose poems. Even if she did, there was no way she could beat her. If you lose, you'll take the initiative to leave the Duke of Qin's residence. Duanmu Yao emphasized each and every word, her voice echoing throughout the entire hall. All right, Han Yunqi indifferently replied. Her tone was light, but everyone was inexplicably shocked. You first. Duanmu Yao didn't relent. This time, Han Yunqi didn't refuse. She took a sip of tea and unhurriedly recited one of Grandpa Mao's classic quatrains. Wind and rain send spring back, snow and wind welcome spring. Already 1,000 feet of ice on the precipice, flowers still bloom. By this point, the entire hall had already sunk into silence. Everyone's souls seemed to have been hooked as they listened attentively, waiting for Han Yunqi to continue. Princess Changping and Duanmu Yao looked at each other, their expressions gradually changing. Han Yunqi paused, then smiled faintly before continuing, Beauty doesn't strive for spring, but reaps spring when it arrives. When the mountain flowers bloom, she smiles in the midst of the thicket. When she finished reciting, Princess Changping was stunned. As for Duanmu Yao, she only felt that the entire world had quieted down after Han Yunqi's last 3 words, smiles in the midst of the thicket. It was so quiet that she could only hear her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Heavens! Did she hear wrongly? Was she dreaming? How could there be such a wonderful poem in this world? It was so wonderful that even though it came from Han Yunqi's mouth, she couldn't help but be willing to accept its goodness, its wonder. When praising plum blossoms, other than praising the character of the plum blossoms, it mostly expressed the poet's loftiness and self-admiration. However, Han Yunqi's poem was completely different. That line, when the mountain flowers bloom, she smiles in the midst of the thicket, simply defeated all the other masterpieces. It expressed a humble, refined, and magnanimous attitude. Duanmu Yao looked at Han Yunxi in disbelief, then fell heavily to the ground, her beautiful face drained of color. At this time, everyone was still carefully savoring Han Yunxi's 2 lines. They were incomparably surprised and shocked. After a long, long silence, Long Tianma suddenly clapped loudly. Good. Excellent. Wonderful. Imperial Qin Ant, you've truly hidden your depths. Today, you've finally opened everyone's eyes. Long Tianma was too surprised. Even if it was a man, he didn't have the integrity and bearing of that poem. The words were like the person, and the poem was also like the person. This woman was indeed very arrogant, but she had the qualifications to be arrogant. She really was a strange woman. How many more stunning aspects of her had yet to be revealed? Chapter 151. Long Tianma stared at Han Yunxi in disbelief. This was the second time he'd seen her up close. The first time was when she'd cured his strange illness and saved his life. The feeling this time was completely different. No matter how much he tried to ignore it, he couldn't fool himself. He liked this woman. Moreover, he knew that she was different from Duanmu Yao. Duanmu Yao could help him secure his position as crown prince and the throne in the future, but Han Yunxi could bring his life to a whole new level. However, he constantly reminded himself of one fact. The man behind this woman could also help him ascend to the throne, but he could also easily destroy everything he had now. He couldn't afford to offend him. How could an ant shake a tree? How could a lone star compete with the brilliant moon? He could only secretly hope that the Duke of Qin hadn't discovered this woman's difference. Perhaps the proud and aloof Duke of Qin would miss this woman. Perhaps, one day in the future, there would still be hope for him. Long Tianma's applause brought the stunned crowd back to their senses. Quite a few people joined in. Wonderful, ambitious, and magnanimous. This poem will definitely become a classic. Esteemed Wang Fei is truly unfathomable. His Highness Duke of Qin has good taste. Hehe. As expected of Qin Wang Fei, this humble one is convinced. I'm sincerely convinced. Without a certain level of magnanimity, it's impossible to write such a poem. Esteemed Wang Fei, we really don't need to continue. Many of those who had been waiting to see Han Yunxi make a fool of herself were openly praising Han Yunxi. They were willing to admit their inferiority. When one reached a certain height, many people would be jealous. But when one reached true heights, those who envied one would only look up to one. Han Yunxi didn't like plagiarizing, but if this method could shut these people's mouths and let these self-righteous women know that there was always someone better than them, then she was very willing to be a lay feng for once. Now, it was time for her to take revenge. She looked at Duanmu Yao and smiled faintly. Princess Rongla, it's your turn. Only then did Duanmu Yao recover from her shock. Her heart skipped a beat and her body trembled. It was time for her to perform. However, if she didn't do anything better, then she would just be a foil and a disgrace. Moreover, Han Yunxi had just said that she was afraid that if her poem was too good, she would be too embarrassed to compose another one. Now, if she really did it, it wouldn't be as good as her in comparison. Wouldn't it really be like what she said, and she would lose even more face? What should she do? Originally, she had wanted to embarrass Han Yunxi, but now she was being watched by everyone. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. As time passed, the crowd grew quieter and quieter. Duanmu Yao's face gradually turned red. She wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into. Everyone was waiting. Those who'd stood up earlier, those who'd been called out by Princess Changping, were all rejoicing that they hadn't gone up. Otherwise, the ones who'd be embarrassed right now would be themselves. Han Yunxi, this woman, was too frightening. She hid her strength too deeply. It looked like they'd better avoid direct conflict with her in the future. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. It had to be said that at this moment, even Princess Changping was rejoicing. Luckily, the one who'd made the bet with Han Yunxi was Duanmu Yao. If it had been her, then the biggest joke today would have been her. Han Yunxi's patience was limited. She smiled and kindly reminded Princess Rongla, "You've been thinking about it for a long time. You've already published so many poetry books. It's just a poem about plum blossoms. You don't need to think about it for so long, right? Duamu Yao's head snapped up to look at her. Seeing the radiant light in her eyes, she really wanted to kill this woman. She took a few deep breaths and finally admitted defeat. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Esteemed Wang Fei is amazing. This princess admits her inferiority. Han Yunqi, this girl, would definitely take revenge." She wasn't modest in the slightest as she laughed. "Aya, didn't I remind you long ago? You still insisted on me going first and insisted on making a bet. Now, you'll have to fulfill your end of the bet, right?" Duanmu Yao was so angry that she could taste blood in her throat. Only the heavens knew how sullen she felt. She lowered her voice and hatefully said, "Of course, I'll accept my loss. From now on, this princess won't write any more poems." Han Yunqi was very satisfied. She smiled innocently and brightly. She turned to look at Princess Chongping. "Chongping, are we competing in anything else? Painting? Playing the zither? Or playing a game of chess?" How could Princess Chongping dare to agree? She hurriedly refused. "It's the same thing every year. How boring. I don't think there's any need." Right now, no one knew how deep Han Yunqi's foundation was. Who would dare to compete with her? Princess Chongping really regretted it to death. If she knew things would turn out like this, she wouldn't have bothered with the poetry competition at all. Not only had she failed to defeat Han Yunqi, she'd even stepped on Princess Rongla and stunned everyone. If that poem spread, it would definitely cause a stir in Tianning's capital city. Now that Han Yunqi had defeated Princess Rongla and forced her to give up poetry for the rest of her life, it wouldn't just cause a stir in Tianning's capital city, but all of Cloud Realm Continent. After all, Princess Rongla was one of Cloud Realm Continent's famed talented women. It was hard not to become famous after defeating her. After all, Princess Rongla's fame resounded throughout Cloud Realm Continent not only because of her true talent, but also because she'd spent a lot of time and money on creating public opinion. Han Yunqi, on the other hand, had simply used a poem to pick up a huge bargain. After Princess Chongping's refusal, no one else dared to stir up any more trouble. A new round of refreshments was brought in and everyone quietly tasted them. Princess Chongping resentfully lowered her head and drank her tea. It was too unexpected. She needed some time to compose herself and reevaluate Han Yunqi. Meanwhile, Duanmu Yao had truly suffered a blow. The more she thought about it, the more sullen she felt. The more she thought about it, the more humiliated she felt. She didn't even dare to raise her head to look at anyone else. Finally, she couldn't sit still any longer and used her body's discomfort as an excuse to leave early. If she wanted to leave, Long Tianma had no choice but to accompany her. Han Yunqi tasted the pastries with relish as she watched Duanmu Yao's retreating form. As she watched, she couldn't help but think of Long Fei Yi. It had been days since she'd seen that fellow. Actually, she assumed that Long Fei Yi would accompany her today as well, but it was Long Tianma who'd come instead. Rumors had it that there were 3 candidates for the marriage alliance: Long Fei Yi, Long Tianma, and Mu Qingwu. Judging from Princess Chongping's attitude, Mu Qingwu was impossible. She'd only choose between Long Fei Yi and Long Tianma. Just what was that fellow thinking? She'd said she wouldn't care about his affairs, but Han Yunqi couldn't help but feel conflicted again. It would be New Year's Eve in a few days. Duanmu Yao wanted to spend the New Year in Tianning, but who was she planning to spend it with on New Year's Eve? Where would she spend it? Would there be news of the marriage alliance after New Year's? Was it true that Long Fei Yi was going to travel after New Year's Eve? Soon enough, plum blossom wine was brought in. Princess Chongping finally lifted her head and discovered that Murong Wanru had been giving her meaningful glances the entire time. Princess Chongping glanced at the plum blossom wine, a trace of coldness flashing through her eyes. She pulled herself together and nodded towards Murong Wanru, indicating that she shouldn't worry. By the time the plum blossom wine was served, the plum blossom meat was only halfway over. Although Han Yunqi had stolen all the limelight in the first half, there was still the second half. Princess Chongping had made ample preparations this time. How could she let Han Yunqi off so easily? The best part was in the second half. Plum blossom wine was a specialty of the plum blossom meat. It was brewed from last year's plum blossoms and snow. Although the wine was fragrant, It was very easy to get drunk. Most people would stop after tasting it. Of course, there were often people who drank excessively and accidentally got drunk. They could only be sent to a distant room to rest for the night before returning by themselves the next day. After tasting a few mouthfuls, Princess Chongping spoke up. Every year there's only poetry and songs. The four arts are so boring. We've had enough of admiring the plum blossoms. I think we should try something new. How about it? I presume the princess has a good idea? Murong Wanru, who'd been silent all this time, finally spoke up. The other girls beside her also chimed in. Yes, we should try something new. This year the princess is hosting, so what she says goes. Your Highness, if you have any good ideas, quickly say them. Princess Chomping chuckled. This year, Imperial Mother isn't here. How about we play something big? Han Yunxi's heart thumped at these words. She was on guard. However, almost everyone present was delighted and agreed. The atmosphere was lively. Princess Chongping stood up. Let's have a drinking competition. Let's have this plum blossom wine. Fresh. Let's have this. Your Highness, this is a good idea. We women don't lose to men. Today, let's have a drinking competition. A drinking competition was much more fun than a poetry competition, especially for many of the women present. This was a rare opportunity to let go of their restraints and reveal their true natures. Everyone was in high spirits. Since the Empress wasn't here, Princess Chongping was hosting. In any case, with Princess Chongping's support, no one was afraid of anything. Of course, many of the men were in a wait-and-see mode. They didn't plan on participating. After all, a drinking competition with women was somewhat unfair. Watching women compete in drinking was a great joy in life. However, the North and South young masters were eager to give it a try. The joy in their eyes was hard to hide. Gongzi Che lightly fanned himself with a charming smile. Princess Chongping, how should we compete? Princess Chongping was waiting for these words. She immediately replied, in previous years, you newcomers would have to perform. I think this year, we'll have a drinking competition. Do you dare? Newcomers referred to those who were attending this year's banquet for the first time. In other words, Han Yunxi and the North and South young masters. She wanted them to have a drinking competition? What was the meaning of this? Han Yunxi frowned as she looked at Princess Chongping. Chongping, speak clearly. You want this Wang Fei to compete in drinking with men. What do you mean? Princess Chongping pretended not to understand the meaning behind Han Yunxi's words. She earnestly replied, it means that you three newcomers will compete to determine a champion. Then you'll start defending the ring. Esteemed Wang Fei, you wouldn't be afraid, right? It's fine if you don't dare. Just admit defeat and withdraw. As soon as she finished speaking, Murong Wanru opened her mouth. Sister-in-law, everyone's in high spirits. Don't be a wet blanket. That's right, that's right. Esteemed Wang Fei, we're very optimistic about you. Esteemed Wang Fei, you have to represent us women and win against the two of them. Don't lose face. Esteemed Wang Fei, it's rare to have such good wine. Don't let it go to waste. Everyone began to persuade her. Han Yunxi knew she couldn't escape. She glanced at the North and South young masters, a complicated look flashing through her eyes. The real trouble had come. Her alcohol tolerance wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. She had heard of the North and South young masters before. One of them was a dissolute man who immersed himself in brothels, while the other spent his days mingling with actors. Both of them spent their days drinking wine. If she didn't participate, not only would she dampen everyone's spirits, she'd also give them a hard time. But if she did participate, it would be a tough battle. Last time, you made a bet with Mu Luiwe about taking off your outerwear. This time, you actually want to take off your pants. Are you still a woman? You are really ruthless. Are you that confident of winning? Unexpectedly, Han Yunxi added, this rule isn't limited to just us three newcomers. It's the same for those who challenge the arena master. If you win, you'll be the arena master. If you lose, You'll have to take off your pants and run a lap around the arena. Since you're going to play, you might as well play big. Hearing Han Yunqi's words, the women who'd been itching to give it a try all turned ghastly pale as their hearts beat like drums of retreat. Although the outcome wasn't certain, the rules were set. Once they participated in a drinking competition, there would be risks. Who would dare to let themselves take such a risk? One had to know that Mu Luiyue had such a prominent status and was also Princess Chongping's close friend. Even if someone else took her place, her reputation would still be ruined. If they were to lose, wouldn't they end up even worse off than Mu Luiyue? The crowd was silent. The North and South young masters, who were as ostentatious as flowers, were also silent, their faces filled with disbelief. Very good. Just now everyone was urging and even provoking Han Yunqi. Now, it was Han Yunqi's turn to provoke. She raised her brows and looked at the North and South young masters, smiling. Since the two young masters are in such a good mood, why don't we play a bigger game? You wouldn't dare, right? The North young master, Zhang Sunche, had never been able to withstand provocation. After hesitating for a moment, he couldn't help but smile from ear to ear. How could we not dare? As long as the Wang Fei is willing, this one will definitely accompany you to the end. He thought. Han Yunqi was at most a woman. Although her background was ordinary, she was still a well-behaved girl. How many opportunities did she have to compete in drinking? How good could her alcohol tolerance be? She proposed such a frightening condition, most likely to scare everyone away. Others might fall for it, but he wouldn't fall for it. She, as a woman, could afford to play, but as a man, how could he not dare to play? What would others think if this spread out? A man versus a woman, who was afraid of who? Once the North young master agreed, the South young master, Li Muge, couldn't refuse. Although he was extremely unwilling and didn't have the guts, the North young master had already agreed. If he backed down, wouldn't he become a laughingstock? All right, Wang Fei, this one will also accompany you to the end. Li Muge finally said something with a bit of manliness. Han Yunqi was very satisfied and gave the two of them a thumbs up. Her actions were free and easy, full of confidence. The surrounding people were uneasy and began to speculate. Could it be that this woman's alcohol tolerance was very good? Was she hiding her strength again? This way, her only opponents would be the North and South young masters. If she won against these two, her troubles would be solved. For the sake of fairness, the three of them didn't use a double elimination system and didn't care who went first. Instead, all three drank at the same time. Within the set time, whoever drank the most wine would be considered the winner. The table was set and the wine was served. The drinking competition was about to begin. After confirming that they didn't need to participate, the crowd was once again in high spirits. The atmosphere was very lively as everyone cheered for the three of them. Without a doubt, it was all for the North and South young masters. Han Yunqi calmly sat down, unaffected. The three of them each had a table and a chair. The table was filled with wine jars, with quite a few piled to the side. A palace maid stood by each of them, ready to serve wine at any time. The host was, of course, Princess Chongping. She meaningfully glanced at Morong Wanru, who was hidden in the crowd, then excitedly stood up and walked out. With a raise of her hands, the lively scene quieted down. In the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, whoever has the most empty jars will be the winner. Everyone present is a witness. Princess Chongping loudly declared. No problem. Sure. The North and South young masters liked this kind of rule too much. In the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, with their usual standards, as long as they put in a bit more effort, there probably wouldn't be anyone present who could beat them. They glanced at Han Yunqi with disdain, then looked at each other with narrowed eyes. They clearly knew that their true opponents were each other. Imperial Chinan, let me confirm with you again. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Princess Chongping specifically asked. Han Yunqi seriously looked at the North and South young masters, her gaze seeming to be scanning for something. After a pause, she said, "We can begin." Okay. Princess Chongping personally lit the incense on the side. Begin. With that, the three of them moved almost simultaneously. The North and South young masters picked up their wine jars and began to gulp down large mouthfuls. Han Yunqi was no exception. In a battle of quantity, there were no shortcuts. They could only drink as fast as they could. In the beginning, it was a competition of speed. Towards the end, it was a competition of alcohol tolerance. Drinking fast at the beginning meant drinking more, but towards the end, it was a test of alcohol tolerance. Drink, drink, drink. The three of them moved very quickly. Jar after jar of wine was emptied and smashed to the side. As soon as it began, the scene was very intense. No one present dared to make a sound, afraid to disturb them. Not long after, the distance between them increased. The North and South young masters had smashed almost the same number of jars, 5 each. Han Yunqi was 2 jars behind them. Although Han Yunqi had drunk 2 jars in such a short time, which was considered pretty good for a woman's alcohol tolerance, this was a competition. Everyone was concerned about winning or losing. No one would sympathize with her. Boom! The North young master smashed his 6th jar, followed by another bang. The South young master followed closely behind. Han Yunqi's 3rd jar was still in progress. Looks like Qin Wangfei won't be able to make it in time. She's already so far behind at the beginning. She'll definitely fall even further behind. Isn't that so? The real competition of alcohol tolerance is at the end. Right now, the alcohol probably hasn't kicked in yet. After a while, the alcohol will kick in and she probably won't be able to continue. Very quickly, discussions broke out everywhere. Chapter 153. In the midst of the discussion, many people were already waiting for the time to pass, wanting to see Han Yunqi lose. If she lost, she would have to fulfill the terms of the bet. Mu Liuyue's reputation had just gone down the drain, and now Han Yunqi, who had personally set the terms of the bet, was also going to fulfill it. This was simply the capital's biggest show of the year. Who wouldn't look forward to it? If news of this spread out, the entire imperial capital would be shaken. Of course, Princess Chongping and Murong Wanru were also looking forward to it. However, compared to the bet, they were looking forward to Han Yunqi getting drunk even more. Many people left their seats and came forward, wanting to see more clearly. There were also many people sitting in groups of 3 or 5, whispering. Murong Wanru slipped to Princess Chongping's side and whispered, "Princess, are you ready?" Princess Chongping's gaze never left Han Yunqi. Her lips curved in a sinister smile, and she whispered, "Don't worry. Watch your show and prepare well." Yes. Murong Wanru understood and quietly returned to her original position. No one noticed her movements. Everyone's attention was on the 3 tables in front of them. At this time, Han Yunqi finally smashed the 3rd jug and picked up the 4th. However, the North and South lords were already on the 7th jug. Princess Chongping was delighted and kindly reported the numbers for the 3 of them. The North and South lords drank 6 jugs each. Qin Wangfei has already drunk 3 jugs. As soon as she finished speaking, who knew that the North Lord would raise his brows and wink at Princess Chongping. Of course, his hands didn't stop moving. He casually threw out the 7th jug, which crashed to the ground with a bang, leaving not a single drop of wine behind. Heavens! So fast! For a moment, the entire audience cried out in surprise. This finally affected the South Lord and Han Yunqi. The South Lord looked over and became anxious. He simply stood up, grabbed the 7th jug with both hands, and poured it in even more crazily. Drink, drink, drink. It had to be said that this kind of Li Muge was too manly. No matter how one looked at him, he didn't look like a sissy. Young Master Bei's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. He stood up as well and brought over the 8th jug of wine. Holding it with one hand, he raised his head and gulped it down. As for Han Yunqi, she was still sitting. She held her 4th jar of wine with both hands and continued drinking at the same speed as before. Victory and defeat seemed to have become even more obvious. Although there was not much difference between the North and South lords, and the battle was very intense, everyone was more concerned about Han Yunqi. After all, she had lost, and there was more to see. Qin Wangfei, you're already 3 or 4 jars behind them. Good luck. Esteemed Princess Consort, don't lose face for us women. Quickly, quickly. Esteemed Princess Consort, you're really too slow. Why don't you admit defeat? Otherwise, you'll hurt yourself. There were always people who liked to add insult to injury. They shouted at Han Yunshi one after another, wishing they could disturb her and make her lose faster and more miserably. However, Han Yunshi wasn't affected at all. She didn't move, and her movements didn't slow down or speed up. Finally, she smashed her fourth jug of wine. It wasn't known if it was a coincidence or if she had calculated the time well, but the moment she smashed her jug, Princess Chongping announced, "More than half the time has passed. There's still half an incense stick's worth of time left. Young Master Bei has 9 jars, young Master Nan has 8 Han." Princess Chongping was so excited that she almost called out her name. Fortunately, she didn't say it out loud. She paused for a moment and deliberately used a very respectful tone to continue. "Imperial Qin Ant, 4 jars." More than half the time had passed. Han Yunshi had also lost by more than half. She was really too weak. The alcohol was about to kick in. With only half the time left, she could only drink less and less. How could she catch up? She was bound to lose. Just when everyone thought that Han Yunshi would anxiously pick up her 5th jug of wine, she unexpectedly didn't do so. Instead, she stood up with a calm expression. It was this pause that allowed everyone to clearly see her face. It was white with a hint of red. Her eyes were slightly blurred. It had to be said that under her white clothes, she was especially charming. However, what everyone was more concerned about was, what happened to her? Why did she stop? Was she not going to continue? Was she drunk? Or was she going to admit defeat? As Han Yunshi steadied herself, the entire crowd quieted down. No matter what happened to this woman, she was bound to lose. Everyone was nervously waiting for the most exciting moment to arrive. However, who knew that Han Yunshi would faintly smile? She actually held the jug with both hands and tilted her head up so that the jug was directly in front of her mouth. She quickly spun the jug, and in a moment, the wine gushed out like a fountain, pouring into her mouth. Heavens! The speed at which the wine flowed out was even faster than the North and South Lords. Han Yunshi's mouth never closed, and her throat kept moving. How could this be? Not long later, the jug was emptied. Han Yunshi elegantly threw it away and picked up the 6th jug. Using the same method, her hands quickly spun the jug. The opening of the jug was very small, but it was like a faucet open to its maximum capacity. The wine flowed out very smoothly. Han Yunshi's mouth opened wide. Drink, drink, drink. With a bang, the 6th jug broke and the 7th jug was picked up. At this moment, something happened to North and South Lords. Without any warning, their speed suddenly slowed down. South Lord even stopped for a moment to adjust himself before forcefully drinking the wine in his mouth. At this moment, North Lord was drinking the 9th jug, South Lord was drinking the 8th jug, and Han Yunshi. Heavens, she had finished the 7th jug and was picking up the 8th jug. What exactly was going on? Everyone stared in shock, as if the person in front of them wasn't Han Yunshi, but someone else. Actually, Han Yunshi was just using a little trick to make use of the laws of physics. At the beginning, if she wildly drank, it would definitely cause her stomach to bloat to its limit. Not to mention the strength of the wine, in the end, her stomach would definitely be the first to be unable to take it. Once her stomach couldn't take it, no matter how good her alcohol tolerance was, she wouldn't be able to drink anymore. Hence, she chose a moderate speed at the beginning to allow her stomach to slowly get used to it. Gradually, it would expand in preparation for the later stages. When her stomach slowly expanded and started to get used to the large amount of water, she stood up and spun the jug to pour the wine. Don't underestimate this spinning action. This spinning action was the key to speeding up the flow of the wine. The principle was the same as flushing a toilet. Once it spun at a high speed, the wine in the jug would form a vortex and flow out of the jug at the fastest speed. Bang! Han Yunshi's 8th jug was violently smashed. This loud sound attracted the North and South Lords' attention. Actually, they had ignored Han Yunshi just now and didn't know which jug she was drinking. Intuition told them that this woman had smashed several jugs in succession. In the crowd, someone shouted, "Esteemed Princess Consort, this is the 8th jug." The 8th jug? Heavens, the North and South Lords were frightened. Their faces turned ashen. How is this possible? Are you sure? The North Lord looked towards Princess Chongping. Princess Chongping had been counting the jugs. Although she didn't believe it, she still nodded. I'm sure. This time, the North and South Lords were anxious. They both raised their heads to continue drinking. Unfortunately, it was too late. At this moment, their stomachs were so full that they were about to explode. They couldn't drink anymore. After forcing themselves to swallow a mouthful, they immediately vomited. The North Lord was fine. He only staggered a few steps and looked drunk. However, the South Lord couldn't take it anymore. He lay on the side and vomited non-stop, his body paralyzed. The South Lord was out. He lost. Seeing this, the North Lord didn't dare to drink again. He could only watch as Han Yunxi lifted the 9th jug high above her head and spun it backwards. Actually, the North and South Lords were both experienced drinkers. How could they not know that their stomachs needed some time to adjust and expand? However, when facing each other, they couldn't care less. The difference in strength wasn't that great. Victory and defeat could very well be decided by a few mouthfuls of wine. Thus, they had to give it their all from the start. They all thought that Han Yunxi would at most drink 3 jugs. Who knew that this woman had hidden her strength so well? Moreover, she was so proficient in the art of drinking. Her method of drinking far surpassed theirs. The wine flowed endlessly into Han Yunxi's mouth. She stood there, tilting her head back to drink. Although she was a woman, she was as unrestrained as a wine immortal. She had an otherworldly temperament, causing people to stare at her in a daze. Bang! When Han Yunxi smashed the 9th jug, the North Lord, who was beginning to feel tipsy, finally regained his senses. He looked at the incense stick and saw that it was almost burnt to the end. There wasn't much time left. He touched his stomach and burped. Although the alcohol had kicked in and he was drunk, he wasn't completely unconscious. He still knew what had happened. Seeing that Han Yunxi had lifted the 10th jug, he clumsily followed suit. However, it wasn't the half-finished 9th jug, but a new one. The people beside him were about to remind him when the North Lord shouted, "Drink!" He shouted, "Drink!" However, both his hands were pressed against the jug, and he didn't move for a long time. Seeing this, Han Yunxi heaved a huge sigh of relief. She held the 10th jug of wine in her hand and didn't drink it. Actually, even though her stomach was bloated, it wasn't much bigger than the North and South Lords. At this point, she really wanted to vomit, but she forced herself to hold it in. Moreover, the moment she stopped, the effects of the alcohol kicked in. Her head was already spinning, and she could not stand properly. She clenched her teeth and tried to clear her head. Everything was normal. She pretended to be disdainful and looked at the Bei Gongzi as if she was waiting for him. Seeing this, the people around them didn't notice anything strange. However, only Han Yunxi knew how much her stomach was churning. She told herself, "Steady, steady, steady." The incense stick was reaching its end. She had half a jug more than the North Lord. Once the time was up, she would win. Suddenly, the North Lord roared and lifted the jug to drink. Han Yunxi's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to force herself to continue drinking. However, the North Lord had only taken a few mouthfuls before the entire jug was smashed to pieces. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the entire place. He lifted his head and heaved a long sigh. Then, he lowered his head and immediately vomited. His situation was similar to the South Lord's. He couldn't stop vomiting once he started vomiting. However, his situation was slightly better than the South Lord's. The alcohol had kicked in, but he wasn't so drunk that he felt weak. The North Lord had also lost. At this moment, Han Yunxi took a step back and almost fell over. Chapter 154. Time was up. The South Lord hadn't finished his 8th jug. nor had the North Lord's ninth. Both of them were lying on the ground drunk. Han Yunxi drank a total of 9 jugs and was still standing. Han Yunxi had 1. Everyone present was in disbelief, unable to believe what they'd seen with their own eyes. However, the truth was right in front of their eyes. Those who'd been waiting to see Han Yunxi lose, as well as those who didn't care, all had a whole new level of respect for this woman. Too valiant. Truly. They had to hand it to this woman. Princess Chongping was stunned as well. She stood there, looking at the red-faced but still haughty Han Yunxi. For some reason, she felt a sense of inferiority. At this time, Murong Wanru bumped into her from behind. Princess. Princess Chongping recovered her wits and understood that her chance had come. She immediately put on a joyful smile and laughed loudly. I knew my imperial aunt wouldn't lose face for imperial uncle. This wine competition, imperial aunt has won. Everyone believed that Princess Chongping was convinced, but no matter how Han Yunxi looked at it, she felt that something wasn't right. In reality, Han Yunxi couldn't even stand properly. She was also drunk, but she still maintained a bit of clarity. She didn't know why Princess Chongping had invited the North and South Lords, but she felt that something wasn't right. However, she couldn't put her finger on it. However, seeing how drunk the North and South Lords were, she guessed that the two of them wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Then I'll have to ask Princess Chongping to urge the North and South Lords to not forget our bet. Han Yunxi said. Of course. Of course. Princess Chongping was especially happy. After confirming that the wine competition was over, Han Yunxi's vigilance and nervousness relaxed. She couldn't help but admit that she drunk too much and had already exceeded her limits. She slowly sat down and held her forehead with one hand. At this time, her head was dizzy and her stomach was churning. She wanted to vomit but couldn't. Her strength was slowly disappearing. She was too lazy to move even if she wanted to. She just wanted to lie down and sleep. Han Yunxi was about to ask a servant girl to take her to a side room to rest when Murong Wanru, who had been keeping a low profile, walked over. Sister-in-law, let me help you down to rest. You drank too much. There's no need. Just let the palace maid send me there. Han Yunxi said mildly, forcing herself to look a little more clear-headed. She wouldn't feel at ease letting Murong Wanru take her away at this time. Liangxin, Mei Jing, the two of you send the Princess Consort to her room to rest. Take care of her carefully. As soon as Princess Chongping spoke, Liangxin and Mei Jing, the two palace maids, immediately came up to support her. Murong Wanru said hypocritically, Sister-in-law, I'll go with you. No need. You guys can continue. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Han Yunxi really did look very clear-headed, but seeing her drink so much wine, everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before she got drunk. Murong Wanru followed her for a few steps before turning back. She gave Princess Chongping a faint smile before returning to her seat. Princess Chongping also calmly sat down. She glanced at the North-South Masters lying on the side and lazily said, Uniquely, take the North-South Masters away to sober up. A dignified man actually lost to a woman. How embarrassing. Yes, this old servant obeys, Uniquely replied in a hoarse voice. Very quickly, the banquet continued. Princess Chongping seemed to be in a much better mood. She chatted with everyone about anything under the sun, laughing and cursing. It was a lively scene. On the other side of the room, Han Yunxi had the two servant girls withdraw before personally locking the door behind her. Only then did she completely let down her guard. As soon as she relaxed, she fell heavily into a chair and couldn't even stand up. She really drank too much. She really wanted to lie down and sleep, but she knew she couldn't. The fastest and healthiest method was to vomit out all the wine she drank. After resting for a while, she forced her eyelids open. Lying on the side, she used the cruelest method to vomit. She used her finger to press against her tongue. After hesitating for a moment, she dug at her throat. She couldn't take it anymore and vomited. This vomiting was terrible. She hadn't eaten much, so all she vomited was water and wine. She didn't know how many times she dug and how much she vomited. In the end, her 5 viscera and 6 bowels finally felt comfortable, and she was much more clear-headed than before. It was just that her entire body was limp, and she didn't have any strength. After Han Yunxi rinsed her mouth, she took out some glucose water from her detoxification system to drink to prevent herself from collapsing. Although she was a poison doctor, her detoxification system's medicine storehouse had prepared many emergency medicines. Anyone who had gotten drunk before knew that even after vomiting and drinking glucose water, one would need to sleep for at least a few hours to recover their strength. Han Yunxi returned to the bed with difficulty and almost fell down. She didn't have any more strength to move her position. She fell asleep in the same position as when she fell down. The room was silent. However, not long after, there was movement from the tightly shut door. The creaking sound got louder and louder. This was obviously someone trying to pry open the door. On the bed, Han Yunxi didn't have any strength in her body. She was unconscious and didn't hear any movement at all. Very soon, with a clang sound, the door was locked and the door was carefully pushed open by someone outside. She only heard a series of whispers. She didn't know who it was and didn't know what they were talking about. She only saw a person being pushed in, and with a bam sound, he collapsed onto the ground. Following that, the door slowly closed. Everything returned to its original silence. Han Yunxi still didn't know anything. Inside the door, the person who was pushed in was none other than the drunk and unconscious Master Bei, Zhang Sunche. He laid on the ground for a while but didn't fall asleep. Instead, he turned over and faced the sky. His face was red. His ears and neck were all red. That kind of red seemed to be deeper than when one was drunk. It made people feel hot for him. At this moment, Zhang Sunche's body was indeed hot. He was completely unconscious and his body was warm. However, as the hot feeling became more and more obvious, he seemed to have gradually regained his strength. He didn't know where this strength came from. He only felt that his abdomen was suffocating and couldn't wait to vent it out. So hot. He muttered to himself as he unconsciously tore open his collar and undid his belt. He climbed up and stumbled a few steps before he steadied himself by holding on to the table. At this moment, he suddenly saw Han Yunxi on the bed. In an instant, a wave of heat rose from his lower abdomen. Zhang Sunse couldn't help but swallow his saliva and laugh drunkenly. Woman, hee, this prince is coming. How could he recognize that it was Qin Wangfei? His face revealed a lewd smile as he undid his belt and walked over step by step. Little lady, this prince is coming. Seeing that Zhang Sunche was approaching, Han Yunxi didn't move at all, as if she didn't know how dangerous her situation was. Zhang Sunche anxiously took off his shirt and actually started undoing his pants. He was clearly drugged. Heavens, Han Yunxi didn't know at all. Too scary. At this moment, Zhang Sunche was only 3 steps away from the bed. He stood still and looked at Han Yunxi as if looking at prey, swallowing his saliva. However, at this moment, beep beep, beep beep beep, Han Yunxi suddenly heard an urgent warning in her mind. Poison. Her long-term professional vigilance made the basically drunk and asleep Han Yunxi immediately open her eyes when she heard this warning. She instantly woke up. It must be known that as a doctor, even if she received a rescue mission in the middle of the night, she had to immediately wake up. However, the moment she woke up, the shirtless Zhang Sunche suddenly pounced over. Han Yunxi cried out in alarm and dodged out of the way. Zhang Sunche fell onto the bed beside her. As for her, her entire body was weak. That pounce just now was just an emergency response. She also lay on the side and looked at the man beside her in disbelief. She was so scared that her face turned green. It was actually Zhang Sunche. Why was he here? Beep, beep, beep. Beep, beep, beep. In her mind, the detoxification system kept reminding her. Han Yunxi focused and immediately understood what was going on. This guy had been drugged with an aphrodisiac. Although an aphrodisiac was called a medicine, it was actually a kind of poison. A poison that harmed people. Didn't she lock the door? How did this guy get in? Han Yunxi looked towards the door and found that the door bolt had been pried open. She instantly sucked in a cold breath and immediately understood that this was a conspiracy. Zhang Sunche must have been drugged before being thrown in. Prying open the door with such a big commotion, Were the servant girls and guards all dead? They didn't notice? This must have been done by Princess Chongbing. Despicable. No, it was simply disgusting. She actually used such a despicable and dirty method. Han Yunqi was still fuming. Who knew that Zhang Sunche suddenly flipped over and reached out a lewd claw towards her. Little lady, don't dodge. This lord guarantees that you'll feel very good. Han Yunqi dodged his arm, but Zhang Sunche's other hand immediately reached over and grabbed her sleeve. He suddenly pulled her close and sucked in a deep breath, following which, his leg was about to cross over. Han Yunqi was scared out of her wits. She didn't have the strength to break free or dodge. She didn't think much and took out a golden needle from the detoxification system as a weapon. Using all her strength, she stabbed towards Zhang Sunche's inner thigh. Ah! Zhang Sunche groaned and rolled to the side in pain. At this time, his drunkenness had sobered up a little. Only, under the interaction of the drug and alcohol, he had long lost his rationality. His lust was unbearable, and he couldn't wait to take this woman. Stinky woman! He roared angrily and pounced over again. Han Yunqi wanted to escape, but she was really too weak. When she turned over, she accidentally fell off the bed. But who knew that Zhang Sunche actually grabbed her arm and wouldn't let go? His other hand reached over in a wretched manner. Scram! Han Yunqi shouted angrily and stabbed the golden needle again. But she really didn't have the strength. This time, to Zhang Sunche, it didn't hurt or itch at all. Zhang Sunche suddenly pulled and tore her sleeve. This tug actually released Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi threw herself to the side and finally put some distance between Zhang Sunche and herself. She let out a long sigh. Only then did she realize that she could poison and detoxify. Damn it! Was she scared out of her wits? She couldn't wait to poison this damned thing to death, but she still held it in. Since Princess Chongbing had drugged him, there had to be a next step. Nothing could happen to Zhang Sunche. At this time, Zhang Sunche climbed off the bed and pressed towards Han Yunqi again. The aphrodisiac he had been drugged with was very common. Han Yunqi knew how to detoxify it with a single scan. She held the golden needle in her hand and aimed it at the acupuncture point on Zhang Sunche's abdomen. 2 needles, and the aphrodisiac would be detoxified. She trembled as she watched Zhang Sunche approach. She didn't have much strength, so she could only strike when Zhang Sunche was close. Her palms were sweating. She had never been so nervous in her life. One had to know that if she made a mistake, she would be finished. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.